Declaro aberto o Fórum Parlamentar do G20.
I declare open the Parliamentary Forum G20
esta presidência,
and
a senhora
President
senadora
Senator
Barros,
Leila Barros
líder da bancada feminina
of
do
the
Senado
female
Federal,
caucus in the Federal Senate,
neste
representing
ato, o presidente do Senado
the
Federal,
President
senador
of the
Rodrigo
Senate,
Pacheco.
Mr. Rodrigo Pacheco.
A senhora presidente da União
The President
Interparlamentar
of the Interparliamentary Union,
Tulia Axon,
Tulia Axon,
a senhora deputada federal
Federal Congressman
Benedita da Silva,
Ms. Benedita da
coordenadora da
Silva,
bancada feminina
coordinator
na Câmara dos
of
Deputados,
the female caucuses,
a senhora deputada federal
Federal
Maria
Senator
do Rosário,
Maria do Rosário,
segunda secretária da
Second
mesa
Secretary
diretora
of the
da Câmara dos
Directors
Deputados,
Panel of the Chamber of
a
Deputies,
senhora secretária-geral
Secretary
das
General
Relações
of
Exteriores,
Foreign Affairs,
embaixadora
Ambassador Maria Laura da Rocha,
o senhor ministro
representing
do Estado
the
das
Minister
Relações
of Foreign
Exteriores,
Affairs,
Mauro Vieira.
Vieira.
Convido
I
a todos
invite
para
all
que, em posição de respeito,
that in a position of respect,
entoarmos o hino nacional.
we will play the national hymn.
Se o penhor dessa igualdade conseguimos conquistar com braço forte, em teu seio, ó liberdade, desafio nosso feito à própria morte. Ó pátria amada, salve, Brasil, um sonho imenso, raio livre, de amor e de esperança a terra desce, se teu formoso céu risonho e
Convido a
I'd
coordenadora
like
da
to
bancada
invite
feminina
the
na Câmara dos
coordinator,
Deputados, deputada Benedita da
a female
Silva,
leader in our
e a
Congress,
líder da bancada
Miss Benedita
feminina no
da
Senado,
Silva,
senadora Leila
and
Barros,
Senator Leila Barros
para
from the
realizarem
Senate
a entrega solene
to make
da
the
declaração final
solemn
da Carta de
delivery
Alagoas,
of the letter of
à 10ª
Alagoas
cúpula de
to the
presidentes
10th
dos
summit
parlamentos
of
do G20.
presidents of parliaments of the G20.
Bom, parabéns, hein?
Cadê a nominata? A nominata. Saudar os outros representantes do país. Senhoras e senhores,
Ladies and gentlemen,
antes de mais nada,
before we start,
agradecer a presença de todas
I
as
would like to thank
delegações,
the presence
todos os
of all
representantes,
delegations,
presidentes,
all representatives,
parlamento, às
speakers,
pessoas, às
parliamentarians
autoridades que compõem esta mesa, já
authorities
citadas anteriormente,
that have been mentioned before,
deputadas federais do Brasil, deste parlamento,
federal deputies of
representam
Brazil,
esta casa, senhores
representing this House,
embaixadores, líderes
ambassadors,
partidários,
party leaders
que fazem parte desse evento.
that are part of this event.
É com grande alegria
It's with great
que
joy
apresento em nome do
that I
Parlamento
present, in
brasileiro,
the name of the Brazilian
as
Parliament,
nossas mais calorosas
our
boas-vindas
warmest
aos
warmest
participantes
welcome
deste Fórum
to the
Parlamentar do G20.
participants of this
Com este
G20.
evento, damos a
With
largada
this
para
event,
3 dias de debates
we
e
will have
intercâmbios
3
da 10ª
days
cúpula
of
de
debate
presidentes dos parlamentos
of
do
the
G20,
10th G20
o
or
nosso
P20
P20,
Parliamentarians
em Brasília.
in Brasilia.
E pergunto,
And I'd ask,
que é a melhor maneira
is
para
there a better
começar o
way
evento
to start the event
internacional já abrigado neste
already
plenário do que pela
within this
discussão dos
plenary,
resultados
and that by
e
the
das
discussion
recomendações
of
da
the
primeira
results
reunião
and
de
the
mulheres
recommendations
parlamentares do P20,
of the first meeting of
promovida
the
pela
P20
presidência brasileira em
women
Maceió,
parliamentaries
nos dias 1 e 2
in the
de julho passado.
1st and 2nd of past
O
June.
papel das mulheres na política,
The role of women
na
in
economia,
politics, in
na
the
sociedade
economy
está no
and in the
cerne das
society
discussões
is at the center of the
pretendemos
discussion,
promover
and we pretend
neste
to
fórum
promote
e
in
na
this
cúpula.
forum and in the
Não há
summit.
como falar de combate à
We
fome,
cannot speak of combating
pobreza,
hunger,
a
poverty,
desigualdade, se não
inequality,
avançarmos na
if we do
promoção
not advance in
da igualdade
promoting
de gênero,
equality
da
of gender,
autonomia econômica
of the
feminina,
female
da superação do
economic
racismo.
autonomy and overcoming
São
racism.
essas condições
These are the conditions
essenciais
that are essential
para que todas as mulheres
so that
possam
all
viver com
women
dignidade,
can live with
ser
dignity
livres para ocupar
and to be
os
free
espaços que desejam.
and to occupy the spaces
Não há
they
como
desire.
falar em desenvolvimento
We cannot talk about
sustentável
development
sem
that is
abordar a
sustainable
posição das mulheres,
without talking about women's
especialmente
positions,
aquelas em
especially
situações
those
mais
in
vulneráveis.
situation of
São
vulnerability.
elas
as que são as que mais
These
sofrem os
are the
impactos da
ones that
mudança
suffer the
climática.
most the impacts of
Como
climate
sabemos, as
change.
mulheres têm papel
And as
vital
we know, women have
na
a
gestão
vital
de
role
recursos naturais
in
em suas
managing
comunidades.
natural resources in their
Conhecendo e
communities,
aplicando práticas
knowing
sustentáveis
and having
que podem
sustainable
frear ou
practices
mitigar
that can break
prejuízos
or
ambientais
mitigate
graves.
environmental
Tampouco
changes.
poderemos falar numa governança
And we
adaptada
cannot
aos
talk
desafios do século
about
XXI
governance adapted to the
se não
21st
lograrmos
century
ampliar e
if we
fortalecer
don't
os espaços
amplify
das mulheres na
and increase the
política
places of women in
demais
politics
instâncias de poder
and in
nos
other instances of power,
interno e internacional.
be it internal or
Este
international.
fórum também
And in this forum,
cumpre a promessa de
we
que
fulfilled the
a reunião em
promise
Maceió
that the meeting in
não
Maceió
fosse apenas
be not
episódio isolado.
only an isolated
Ao
episode.
conectar a reunião de mulheres
Connecting
parlamentares
the
com esta
female
edição da
parliamentarians
P20,
meeting with this
queremos que
G20,
seus resultados
this P20. We
ajudem a
want that these
balizar
results
nossos
support
debates em
our
Brasília,
debates in Brasilia,
também a projetar o
also
encontro
to project
como
the
parte
meeting
essencial e
as an
permanente
essential
da agenda
part
do P20
of
de
the
agora
B20
em
agenda
diante.
from henceforth.
Esta é, aliás,
This is,
a primeira das 8
in fact,
recomendações
the first of
da
8
Carta de
recommendations
Alagoas,
of the
emanada
letter of Alagoas
da reunião das mulheres
that came from
parlamentares em
the
Maceió
women parliamentarians
e
meeting
hoje
in Maceió.
solenemente entregue
And today, solemnly, I deliver to this
pelas
presidency
mãos das coordenadoras das bancadas
through the
femininas
hands
da Câmara
of
dos
the
Deputados
female
e do
leaders
Senado
of
Federal
the
do
Senate
Brasil.
and of the Chamber of Deputies
A
of
Carta de
Brazil.
Alagoas
The letter of
buscou
Alagoas
refletir
sought to
da
reflect
forma mais fiel
in the
possível
most faithful manner possible the plurality of perspectives manifested during the
contém
meeting.
demandas relevantes
It
e
has
urgentes
urgent and relevant
cuja
demands
implementação
whose
merece a
implementation
melhor atenção
deserves the best
e a mais
attention
alta prioridade
and the highest
dos
priority
nossos parlamentos.
of our parliaments.
Senhoras e senhores,
Ladies and gentlemen,
como novamente ilustrado
as
pelos debates em
once
Maceió,
illustrated by the
ainda
debates in
temos
Maceió,
longo caminho a
we still
percorrer.
have a long road ahead.
Segundo a União
Second,
Interparlamentar,
the Parliamentary
a
Union,
média mundial de representação
the average
feminina nos parlamentos
representativeness of females is
países que
25%.
integram o P20
The countries that are part of the B20 are just a little bit above,
no
29%.
caso do Brasil,
In the case of
a
Brazil,
representação feminina
the female
no Legislativo
representation in the
Federal
legislative
está próxima aos 20%.
is close to 20%,
Nesta, que é a
In
legislatura
this,
com maior número de
which is
deputadas e
the
senadoras
legislature with
na
the greatest
história
number
do nosso
of
parlamento,
women
nas
parliamentarians of our
eleições
parliament.
que acabamos de realizar,
In the
as
elections
eleições
we
municipais,
just carried out,
houve recorde
there was a
de mulheres
record
eleitas
of women
para o
elected
cargo de prefeita
as
em suas cidades
mayors in their
O número de
cities.
vereadoras também aumentou em relação ao pleito anterior de
At the
2015.
municipal level, the number of women was also increased. We went from 16%
mulheres eleitas para
of elected women
18,2% nesta última
to
eleição. O
18.2%.
Observatório Nacional
The
da Mulher
National
na Política
Observatory of Women
da
in
Câmara dos
Politics
Deputados apontou
of this
avanço
House
expressivo
pointed an expressive
cumprimento das
advance
cotas partidárias
in fulfilling
de candidaturas
party
femininas
quotas
em
for
comparação
female
com
candidates
eleições anteriores.
as regards previous elections.
Embora devamos avançar,
Even though we should
eu
advance,
penso que muito mais
I do think
esses resultados
that these results
começam a dar caminho, uma
start
luz
to show
para
the
nos
way
animar
to give us light and to give us enthusiasm that the work of the Brazilian legislative in favor of more female representativity is having results.
Em 2009,
In 2009, we approved a law
mínimo
that
de 30%
set
de
a minimum
candidaturas
of
femininas por
30%
partido
female
em
candidates
todas as
per
disputas
party
eleitorais.
in all elections.
Aprovamos na Câmara
We
dos
approved
Deputados,
in the
no ano
Chamber of
passado,
Deputies last year
projeto de lei,
a
senadora
project
Leila, que encontra-se no Senado
that is in the
para
Senate
coibir fraude no
to
uso de
stop
recursos
fraud
destinados a essas candidaturas
in the
femininas.
resources that should go to these female candidates.
Aprovamos
And
lei
in
que modifica o
2001,
Código
we
Penal
modified the law
para tipificar como
to
crime
typify as a
a
crime
violência
in the
política
Penal
contra a
Code
mulher.
if there is political violence against women.
Aprovamos alterações no Código Eleitoral,
2021, we approved the law that in the parties' laws and during elections to assure measures that prevent, repress, and combat this kind of violence against women. I always like to register that women's rights in the parliament in Brazil is more than everything an effort from our female representatives, and certainly in the Senate they are just as brave. Our brave parliamentarians do it through the Secretariat of Women, coordinated by Congresswoman Benedita da Silva, and under the leadership of Soraya Santos, and the Observatory of Women in Politics with Congresswoman Leandra Moura. In the Chamber of Deputies, we have a permanent commission of the defense of women's rights that analyzes debates and votes in legislative initiatives in this area. I am certain, therefore, that these leaderships continue to be decisive in the implementation of the recommendations of the letter of Alagoas. You can be certain to count with my endeavor, ladies and gentlemen, to guarantee equal opportunities and equitative participation of women in power is a civilizational step that has to be done by this Parliament as well. It is a global priority, and for the strengthening of democracies in facing the challenges of the contemporary world. And with that conviction, I announce in the New Delhi Summit a year ago the intention of having a women's parliamentarians meeting of the P20, and with great support of the female parliamentarians, we made this a reality. With the meeting in Maceió, and now with this Parliamentarian Forum. So it's with great satisfaction that I see in this summit the presence of female representatives near the 40%, a sign that we are in the right path and an incentive that we continue our even more ambitious objectives. And under that inspiration, I give to my colleague speakers, especially the South African Parliament, that will be the next P20 presidency, an invitation and a call that together we go in this journey where there will be no return, to make more permanent the meeting of female parliamentarians in our P20. I thank you, all present, in your being able to dialogue and thinking collectively in creating more equal opportunities for women. Your participation here shows that we were right in choosing for our summit the motto, Parliaments for a Fair World and a Sustainable Planet. I wish you all an excellent forum and agreeable stay here in our capital of Brasilia. Thank you very much.
Presidência brasileira à frente do P20
The President of Brazil has the pleasure of handing to all delegations and guests a first publication gathering the interventions of the delegations that participated in the first meeting of women parliamentarians of P20. Some representatives of parliaments and international organizations which are here today and had their speeches, they were recorded in with this intention. This work encompasses relevant and plural materials on the increasing participation of women in decision-making and power spaces, on the importance of gender equity, the promotion of sustainable development, and the central role of economic inclusion of women for social inclusion. We will continue today with the discussions on these same topics. Now we will be bringing the ripening of the Maceió meeting and the recommendations of the Charter of Alagoas to the discussions. I have the honor of now granting the floor to the leader of the women's bench in the Senate, Mrs. Senator Leila Barros, for 5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. President of this House, the Federal Representatives House of our country, Mr. Arthur Little, Federal Representative, which I congratulate the President of the Interparliamentary President, Tulia Axon, also the Federal Representative, our dear Coordinator of the Women's Bench, Representative Benedita da Silva, the Second Secretary of the panel directing Representative Maria do Rosário, General Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Maria Laura da Rocha, representing the Minister of State of the Foreign Affairs, Mauro Vieira. I also congratulate the leader of government in our National Congress, whose birthday is today, Senator Randolfo Rodrigues. On behalf of Dr. Rodrigues, I congratulate all representatives, senators of this Congress. First of all, I'd like to salute and thank for the attendance of the representatives of many international parliaments, international organizations, and all those who came to Brasilia to this P20 meeting. Our warm welcome to our federal capital and my dear home city, which is Brasilia. It is a great honor and satisfaction to participate in the opening of the P20 Parliamentary Forum to propel the recommendations of the first meeting of women's parliamentarians, which was held on July 1 and 2 in Maceió. We had our big host here, which was such a great event. Those who were there know how warm the reception was for all of us. Now, thanking Representative Arthur for the receptiveness and the event that extends to this date, but also for having the opportunity of being present in the capital city of Alagoas, which is a great city. I also congratulate the President of the House, Representative Arthur Lira. I could not begin these words without recognizing his commitment in undertaking this pioneering event for women under the G20. I could not also cease to thank Senator Rodrigo Pacheco for nominating me as leader, as the representative of the Senate in this session. Dear ladies and gentlemen, congressmen and women, the first meeting of parliamentary women on the P20 is an important advancement in our parliamentary diplomacy and allows to reinforce the commitment with the inclusive development, fair development, and sustainable development at the global level. As is known, Brazil in its rotational presidency presidency at G20 has prioritized three axes: fighting hunger and inequality, sustainable development in its three dimensions, economic, social, and environmental, and the reform of global governance. In this context, the meeting of parliamentary women in Maceió highlighted some key issues to promote equity and inclusion by presenting a decisive agenda for our set of working issues. The final declaration of this meeting, which was known as the Charter of Alagoas, identified three priority areas: climate justice and sustainable development for women and girls, the expansion of representativeness of women in decision-making spaces, and the fight against gender inequalities and promotion of the economic independence or autonomy of women. When discussing climate justice, we know that the impacts of climate change disproportionately affect women and vulnerable populations. In this forum, we have the opportunity of sharing legislations, public policies, and good practices, best practices that promote a fair economic transition and also an inclusive one. We need to ensure that our environmental commitments include the gender perspective and ensure that all individuals, independently of their origin, gender, or social situation, have equal access to the benefits of a sustainable planet. The women's representative is another essential pillar. We know that the society can only be truly democratic and fair when women are equally represented in the decisions that have an impact on their lives and their communities. I encourage the colleague parliamentary members and women parliamentarians to reflect on the advancements and the challenges that each of our countries is facing at this point in time, and to consider policies that encourage the participation and leadership of women at all power levels. Finally, the economic autonomy of women is fundamental to fight inequalities. Women with control on their income and their resources contribute directly to the reduction of poverty and to the growth of their communities. This forum must be a space to promote initiatives that ensure equal access to work, financial education, and the mechanisms of social protection, thus establishing the conditions so that women can prosper economically. The Parliamentary Forum of G20 today is also a very special occasion to deliver officially, as was done, the final declaration of the Charter of Alagoas, the 10th Summit of Presidents of Parliaments of the G20. This document is more than a charter of intentions. It is a concrete commitment which needs to be sustained by means of legislative actions, public policies, and especially international cooperation. From the 17 recommendations of the Alagoas Charter, I'd like to highlight a topic for reflection by the representatives of parliaments here. The recommendations so that every year the working sessions of the P20 can begin with the women's meeting. And I conclude my words by reiterating that the success of this forum will be measured by our ability to transform these recommendations, to turn them into practical actions. Let's work together so that our parliament members, our citizens, and the future generations can count on a world that is more just, sustainable, and having gender equality. Thank you very much. At this moment, I'd like to hand over to the Interparliamentary Union's speaker, Ms. Tulia Axon. 3 minutes.
Mr. President, I thank you for this opportunity. distinguished speakers of Parliament, esteemed parliamentarians and guests, dear friends. It is my great honor to address you today, and I state here with deep conviction that the work we do today is not only vital for our parliaments, but for the future of our societies. Today's forum builds on the momentum created at the meeting of the P20 Women Parliamentarians earlier this year, where the Charter of Alagoas was adopted. It is our collective responsibility to transform these commitments into actionable steps that make a tangible difference in the lives of women and girls worldwide. Colleagues, in our discussions today, we must confront a stark reality. Despite progress, gender inequality remains deeply entrenched, including in political decision-making. Currently, women make up just 27% of parliamentarians globally, and only 23% of those are speakers. And we are still lagging behind in ensuring our laws and policies fully incorporate the perspectives of women and guarantee equality in law and in practice. To bring about change, we need to be bold. To do so, we must first ensure 50-50 parity between men and women in Parliament, making it the norm rather than the exception. Why is parity so critical? It's because parity ensures our policies are more legitimate and effective, better reflecting the diversity of the people we serve. Many parliaments today have achieved parity, thanks to the strong gender quotas and political will. They span different regions, cultures, and political systems. But aiming for parity in numbers isn't enough. It is the starting point. We need to amplify women's voices and leadership in Parliament. And we need to address the persistent barriers preventing women from fully participating in political life, starting with discrimination, harassment, and gender-based violence, both online and offline. IPU studies revealed that 1 in 4 women members of Parliament globally has faced physical violence and 1 in 3 has endured economic violence. Over 80% of them have experienced psychological violence during their term in Parliament. An intersectional approach shows us that violence disproportionately affects young women, women with disabilities, unmarried women, and women from minority groups. This situation is unacceptable, dear colleagues, especially in institutions that are meant to set an example. The IPU Kigali Declaration, adopted in 2022, reaffirms our commitment to creating gender-sensitive parliaments where women are safe, valued, and empowered. Beyond parity, the declaration urges our parliaments to ensure gender-responsive lawmaking and budgeting, place vulnerable populations at the center of parliamentary action, and address the caregiving gap that hinders women's career development and advancement. In line with this, the recent launch of CEDAW Committee's General Recommendation number 40 on the equal and inclusive representation of women in decision-making systems reaffirms our collective responsibility and continue advancing women's rights. We have our roadmap. So, colleagues, what are we waiting for? Colleagues, the urgency of climate action cannot be overstated. Women's leadership is critical in shaping just, inclusive, and sustainable climate policies. Women, especially those in vulnerable communities, are often the first to face the devastating impacts of climate change, and their perspectives are essential for crafting solutions that are not only effective, but also equitable. I urge all our parliaments to push for gender-responsive climate policies that meaningfully integrate women's experiences and leadership. This is not just a moral imperative, but a practical one too. Similarly, in a rapidly evolving fields of AI and emerging technologies, Parliaments must ensure innovation benefits everyone. As AI transforms economies and societies, we must foster gender-responsive policies that regulate AI to prevent the reinforcement of existing biases and inequalities. Women's voices must be central to these discussions if we are to harness technology in service of equality and progress for all. Economic empowerment is another key pillar of gender equality. Discriminatory laws, limited financial access, and unequal pay and care responsibilities continue to hold back women. We must prioritize women's financial inclusion and empowerment, revisit our social protection, care and labor policies, lift legal barriers, and implement gender-responsive budgeting. These priorities were underscored in the Charter of Alagoas, and today we must recommit to turning them into reality. Parliaments must champion these efforts in collaboration with civil society and international organizations. Colleagues, the road ahead is challenging, but the path is clear. To achieve gender equality, we must transform our parliaments into institutions that truly reflect the diverse societies we serve. Women's leadership across all aspects of public life is no longer a matter of debate. It is a necessity for a sustainable future. As leaders and lawmakers, we have the power and the responsibility to create conditions that allow women and girls to thrive. As we look ahead next year, that marks 30 years since the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, a landmark commitment for gender equality. Let us build on this momentum to ensure that gender equality remains at the forefront of our national and global undertakings. I thank you for the opportunity and I thank you for listening.
Tenho a honra de conceder a palavra à coordenadora da bancada feminina na Câmara dos Deputados,
Bench Coordinator, Mrs. Benedita da Silva.
Senhor Presidente,
Mr. President,
senhoras e senhores,
dear ladies and gentlemen,
autoridades civis,
civil, military, and ecclesiastical authorities,
senhora
Mrs.
Senadora
Senator Leila,
senhora Presidente
Mrs. President of the Union, Interparliamentarian Union, Tulia Axon,
a senhora segunda
Mrs. Second Secretary of the Directors Panel of the House of Representatives, Representative Maria do Rosário, Mrs. General Secretary of Foreign Affairs, Ambassador Maria Laura da Rocha, representing the Brazilian State Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mauro Vieira. I'd like also to congratulate and especially our composition of the Secretariat of Women, which is composed also by the State Representative Soraya Santos, also Representative Yandra Moura from the Observatory, Representative Isa, Representative Laura Carneiro, and if I forgot any names, please forgive me. I'd also like to congratulate you so you can understand the composition of our Secretariat. Dear Mr. President, I am honored and thankful for being in this opening session of the 10th Summit of Presidents of the G20 Parliaments. I used presidenta in the feminine with an A, because as Claudia Shem said, president, which was recently installed in Mexico, only what we gave name to exists. We are presidentas, we are representatives, we are senators, women senators. This distinction is important because despite our distinctions and divergences, we know all that how much for us women it is more difficult to occupy political power spaces, decision-making spaces as we do nowadays and as we do today. In this pioneering first meeting of women parliamentarians of the G20, in my country we drafted the Maceió Charter with the contributions of many women parliamentarians. Some of them are here today. And being able to hand it to the president of my parliament, Mr. Arthur Lira, on behalf of all of us, is an honor, a unique honor for me. I have faced all types of problems that the marginalized groups of our country must face by embracing my allies and partners of fights and of class, and by experiencing the needs of our communities. I understood that without representativeness in politics, we can't really make much. And this is what we have seen also in our meeting of women from different countries, and history for them was just the same. As the first woman to occupy these political spaces in our country, I experienced a lone victory, which does not have the same strength of the collective victories that can be experienced when we get together and solve a problem that up to then had not even been perceived due to the lack of political representativeness. We show the importance of the presence of girls in politics. So I consider an advancement, Mr. President Leila, that we held this meeting of parliamentary women so that we could create this forum in which G20 topics such as global governance, the eradication of poverty and hunger, environmental and justice and climate justice can be approached from the standpoint of gender and race. Many people still ask us, why this perspective? If we're all the same, we're all equal. And then I asked them, if it were thus, it wouldn't have taken 400 years for us to have the right to vote and being voted and to conquer a seat in the parliament. If we were truly equal, we would have had the parity. It would have been a reality in our lives, and there would be no inequalities in terms of salaries. We wouldn't be responsible for taking care of our homes and families alone, sometimes abandoning our studies, our careers, good jobs, and our autonomy. If we were would we have so much violence? Well, we must take into consideration the color of more than half of the population when we speak about Brazil. After slightly over 100 years after the end of slavery in the country, we still experience its consequences. President Lira has put in the agenda, and we approved the creation of the Black or African Brazilian bench. The Black Consciousness Day is a national holiday, both for public service and universities. And now we are working in a project for the end of home slave work, which unfortunately still exists in Brazil. As we debated in the first meeting of parliamentarian women, the problems that women face are not particular to the Brazilian reality. They are common, and they need need to be debated collectively so that these global solutions can be found. So, what we will be able to enjoy from this initiative and the commitment of President Leila is that during these 3 days, may we be once again for us an opportunity for a new step towards a more just world and a sustainable planet. And may we, women, be the ones who will be opening doors and break glass ceilings and build bridges so we can all have a decent life that we deserve to. My dear President, once again, I am thankful to you, thankful for your valuable support, and we do count on your continued help further on so that in the coming year in South Africa, we may show the results of the efforts of the Brazilian Parliament on behalf of this agenda. Thank you very much.
I have the honor of handing the floor to the second secretary from the Chamber of Deputies, Ms. Maria do Rosário. Your Excellency, President Arthur Liro, Senator Leila Barros from the Senate, President of the IPU, Tulia Axon, Federal Congressman Benedito da Silva, through which I would like to greet the Secretary to the Women, the Observatory, and other agencies, Elia Santos, Diana Santos, Maria Rosas, and other colleagues that I can see here that had such an important work in Maceió, and in homage to this integration with the presence of the Secretary General, Ambassador Maria Laura da Rocha, which I'd like to greet the Foreign Affairs Ministry, the Executive. So it's an honor to be in the opening of this event that joins the parliaments of the G20. I'd like to greet warmly the parliamentarians and authorities here present, and I'd like to highlight that today we've done an historic event. We have a singular opportunity of debating and setting paths for a fairer future and more sustainable environmentally, as suggested by our motto. I'd like to renew and like to greet President Arthur Lira and the Brazilian representation that in New Delhi, in setting this important moment where there is a recognition of the role within democracies of the presence of women in Parliament in all spheres. So it is in fact that the world faces complex problems that are interconnected and demand more from us. They demand that diplomacy be exercised between the executive powers, between nations, in an environment at the global level, but that you also strengthen the diplomacy at the level of the parliaments, so that we might act within the legislative dimension, the normative dimension, in a way to promote advances and to stop, because this is the role of parliaments, and to stop any setbacks when we talk about human rights, environmental responsibilities, and democracy. The world demands wide and collaborative actions that should be organized in structuring access of debates, like the debates that we will carry out today and in the next days. Climate change is not tomorrow, it's already happening. Sustainable development is an immediate need that goes through budgets, definitions, choices that our nations must produce within their sovereignties, but in a global pact for humanity, for collective responsibility. social inclusion in facing hunger and poverty should be a common responsibility, and therefore, debating the reform of these global institutions, we parliamentarians, President Leila, we also have an essential role that Brazil at this moment seeks to develop, joining women and realizing this P20 with a deep commitment to justice. I would like to ask your permission to make like a specific approach, a personal approach, but connected to the dimensions for a sustainable environment. In this Parliament, I have the honor in this panel, coordinated by President Arthur Lira and brilliant participants. But I represent a state, a part of the Brazilian Union, the Rio Grande do Sul state, that this year went through one of the most dramatic moments as regards environment. And I bring this issue because from the real learning of a very ample population abandoned and thrown from one day to another in a condition and where they are hit by climate change, they became immigrants and transfers. They had to go into emergency shelters, like in so many countries of the world who face very sudden climate change effects. I'd like to highlight some of the practical aspects of this experience, which brings something we could learn. We need to get out, even if solidarity is the main model of, and I'd like to thank Brazil and the world for the care they looked at us. So President Leila, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say that globally, when we talk about climate change emergency, that we get out only of managing tragedies that already happened to an analysis, to a possibility of doing the prevention in all senses of these serious climate changes and the way they impact populations. To see live that the poor, the women, children, black people, indigenous, originary populations are more affected. Not by chance, but like in our country, like so many others, we still live in very precarious situations in having access to rights. While pronouncing myself here, I would like to say my conviction that this meeting joins elements and offers perspectives for all communities around the world. When it takes on the responsibility for a greater representation and of more value by women and in all communities. But at the same time, I'd like to establish the dialogue and the connections, that the representation of women, besides being positive in and of itself, that she carries the responsibility of doing different of what politics has been doing until now, and to carry with her these populations that are in vulnerable conditions to a new relationship where sustainable development is something that can be reached by all. We need to commit to face the change, the risks of climate change. Maybe we're going a point where there might be no return. The climate change that is here demands from us, of course, more democracy, more dialogue beyond our national boundaries, more commitment to sustainable development with energy transition and overcoming poverty, so that we do not have vulnerable populations in an excessive level
que elas nos trazem.
and the observed level that it is now. So, ladies and gentlemen, with great faith in humanity, with trust in democracy, I would like to highlight, finally, that it's not given us the right of climate denial. Parliaments should be at the vanguard of dialogue in all senses of democracy, because the essence of parliamentary life is the dialogue among the different. If we are like this as institutions, and from parliaments comes the representative democracies and constitutional democracies, it is our duty from the IPU, and especially from women, to produce at each moment for the close future the possibility of living in a world without injustice, without justice, with a scientific view of climate change, and especially a commitment with democracy, human rights, and prevention of drastic climate change events that affects life in the planet. Have a good meeting. Greetings to all women, to each man, and a certainty that the democracy joins us for a better future. Thank you very much.
Agora eu tenho a honra de
It is
conceder
the
a palavra
honor for
à
me
senhora
now to
secretária-geral
grant the
das
word
Relações
to the
Exteriores,
Secretary
senhora
of
embaixadora Maria
Foreign
Laura da
Affairs,
Rocha,
Ambassador
representando
Maria
o seu
Laura da
ministro
Rocha,
de Estado das
representing the
Relações
Brazilian State
Exteriores,
Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mauro Vieira, for 3 minutes. Thank you.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much. I congratulate the President of the House, Mr. Arthur Lira, and I'm thankful for your Mrs. Leila Barros from the Women's Bench, Mrs. Tulia Axon, President of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, Mrs. Benedita da Silva, Coordinator of the Women's Bench, Mrs. Federal Representative, Second Representative Maria do Rosário, dear ladies and gentlemen, Brazilian parliamentary members from Brazil and from the G20 countries and from the countries and international organizations which have attended here as guests. It's a great satisfaction to participate of the forum, of the G20 Forum, after the first meeting of the P20 women, of which I've had the honor to be present. On that occasion in Maceió, women parliamentarians from 26 countries approved the Charter of Alagoas with recommendations such as the one that was explained here have the main axis of increasing the participation of women in political spaces, decision-making spaces, the fight against economic inequality, the promotion of climate justice and sustainable development. We now resume the discussions to present the proposals of the Charter of Alagoas and the 10th G20 Parliamentary Speakers Summit with the strong potential to have an influence on the international agenda. Forums such as P20 are essential for the sharing of good practices, to learn with the experiences of other countries, and to promote global policies that benefit all women. We should create and implement and enhance our laws that protect women and promote real conditions of the exercise for their political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights. The actions of parliamentary women are fundamental in this sense. Gender inequality and the promotion of women empowerment are cross-sectional topics that cut across the three axes adopted as the priority for the Brazilian presidency of the G20. Fight against hunger, poverty, and inequality and social inclusion must consider the gender perspective in access to nourishment, credit, work, and public spaces for the decision-making processes. Energy transition and sustainable development must consider the disproportionate impacts of the climate and environmental crisis on women, and the reform of global governance institutions must bear in mind that the democratization of governance structures includes an increased representativeness of women in all spheres of decisions, both nationally and internationally, in the public and private sectors. I congratulate the President of the House of Representatives for the initiative of promoting this forum, which will enrich the discussion discussions in our parliaments in the coming days. And I express my trust that the example of the Brazilian presidency will be repeated in future P20 meetings. I also congratulate the women parliamentary members, representatives and senators from Brazil that are participating of these P20 discussions and for working on a daily basis on the concretization of the Alagoas Charter's goals. Thank you very much.
Bom, antes de encerrar, só justificando a ausência aqui
And
do
just
presidente Arthur
to
Lira,
close,
ele teve que se
just
ausentar por
justifying
causa
that
de
President
uma
Arthur
reunião
Lira is
bilateral
absent, he had to go to a bilateral
previamente
meeting.
E ao encerrar essa sessão, eu
And in
agradeço às
closing the
autoridades
session, I
presentes
would
e a
like to
todos que nos
thank the
honraram com seu
authorities
comparecimento.
present
Em
and
seguida,
honored us by being
teremos
here.
início a primeira sessão de trabalho
We will
do
now
Fórum
have the
Parlamentar
first
do G20
working
com o
session
tema
of the
Promovendo a
B20,
Justiça
promoting
Climática e o
climate
Desenvolvimento
justice and
Sustentável
sustainable
sob a
development
perspectiva
from a
de gênero e
gender
raça.
and race
Declaro encerrada
perspective.
a presente
I
reunião e vamos para o
declare
debate.
closed this
Obrigada.
opening panel.
Posso começar? Já posso? Quando a senhora quiser, só seguir. Já quero começar. Senhores e senhoras.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Quem quer falar comigo? Tem uma pessoa que veio aqui. Sim, esperando. Não vai colocar o assessor. Por que você não vai colocar a assessora? Ah, sim, pode, claro. Eu acho que tinha que botar uma desse lá, que eu não falo que sim, mas deixa para a presidenta Benedita não ter justificativa. Fica aqui. Tá. Mas eu vou começar. Já começo. Eu estou começando meio rápido, porque a secretária Benedita está me pedindo para dar início. Posso dar início? Senhores e senhoras,
ladies and gentlemen, I declare open the first working session of the G20 Parliamentary Forum with the theme Promoting Climate Justice and Sustainable Development from a Gender and Race Perspective. Part of the panel are the President of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, Mrs. Tulia Axon, to whom I thank for all her dedication from the IPO in this work carried out in the P20. Also with us, Congresswoman Benedita da Silva, that is invited to remain in the panel, prosecutor as well, coordinator of the observatory. If you want to stay in the panel, you are our guests. They are the ones who are realize or carrying out this event. To continue our work, I would like to clarify that in the working session of this afternoon, each speaker can speak for 5 minutes according to the list of speakers distributed to the delegations. To guarantee our agenda of events and that everyone be equally treated, the audio system in the plenary is programmed to ring a bell 30 seconds before the end of the time of that speaker, as an alert, so that they can conclude, and the microphone is automatically turned off after 5 minutes. I'd also request that all who do speak in a paused manner, so that the simultaneous translation could better reflect the speakers. I thank you for your cooperation and comprehension on the rules necessary for a good working session. And having had that successful meeting of the P20, the presidency of Brazil of the P20 proposes that this forum stimulate the debate on the implementation of the recommendations coming from the meeting in Maceió, and that this kind of meeting become a full part of the P20 calendar from 2025 on. So as to optimize the discussion, I would like to invite the speakers to emphasize laws, public policies, and best practices, national, regional, or international, related to the themes and the recommendations within the Charter of Alagoas. And the first speaker, Mrs. Tulia Axon, President of the Interparliamentary Union, for her speech, which is the opening speech of this discussion, of this session, that will open the debate of our meeting. With the word, Ms. Tulia Axon.
Pode falar da tribuna.
Madam Chair, I would like to thank you for the opportunity once again. Distinguished speakers, deputy speakers, and dear colleagues, climate justice is an imperative for our common future. The foundations of our societies, from food security, health and education, to a functioning economy and democratic governance, are put in jeopardy by the climate crisis. While the impacts of climate-related disasters and disruptions affect everyone, these impacts are most hardly felt by those already facing some form of exclusion or disempowered. As we witnessed firsthand during COVID-19 pandemic, women are disproportionately affected when it comes to crisis. Pre-existing gender-based discrimination, harmful norms, and power dynamics adversely impact women and girls and are deepened during crisis. For example, 1/3 of women work in agriculture globally. However, rural women only account for 15% of landowners globally and are more prone to food insecurity. By 2050, colleagues, climate change may push up to 158 million more women and girls into poverty and cause 232 million to face food insecurity. Studies also show that environmental degradation is connected to increasing levels of gender-based violence arising from constraints in access to natural resources or displacement. Such violence is also often experienced by women's rights defenders and climate change activists. While women are disproportionately impacted by climate change, they are also a collective strength in climate action. They are at the forefront of social movements demanding equal rights, environmental protection, and climate justice. Young women in particular are leading the way in demanding more ambitious climate action. This pattern holds for women in parliaments too. More women in parliaments is related to stronger and more robust climate policies. Colleagues, here today, let us recognize the urgency for concrete and bold actions towards climate justice and gender-responsive and inclusive climate action. It is for us to work towards women's leadership and climate justice as two mutually reinforcing goals. Gender parity in political representation is needed in order to strengthen climate change responses and for women leaders not to be outvoiced in climate action, environmental protection, and disaster risk reduction initiatives. As decision makers, we can lead the way within our spheres of influence to break down existing barriers to climate justice and advance inclusive strategies that yield benefits for our planet and its people. We must start prioritizing gender equality, diversity, and inclusion in climate action through measurable goals, integrated strategies, and adequate funding. We must ensure the leadership of women, girls, and those in vulnerable and marginalized situations in climate negotiations and in our national level responses. Full participation from all segments of society is not only essential for a just transition and meeting the sustainable development goals, but also a fundamental right. Ladies and gentlemen and dear colleagues, I look forward to listening to your deliberations today, and I thank you for listening.
Obrigada à senhora Tulia Exxon, que usou da palavra neste momento, e passo a palavra à senhora Tatiana Sakharova, member of
the High Chamber of the Russian Parliament of the Russian Federation.
Honorable colleagues, it's a great pleasure
мероприятиях, организуемых парламентом Бразилии в рамках председательства страны в группе 20. Сегодня проблемы экологии во всем мире выступают на первый план. Изменение климата, истощение природных ресурсов, загрязнение окружающей среды – эти вызовы угрожают не только будущему планеты, но и благополучию каждого человека. Именно поэтому роль женщин в решении этих глобальных проблем становится все более значимой и заметной. Женщины, как правило, являются хранительницами домашнего очага.
They raise future generations. Their everyday decisions, ranging from food choices and household products to conserving water and energy, have a tangible impact on their family's ecological footprint. A conscious approach to consumption, preference for products made from recyclable materials, a reduction of waste, and active participation in waste separation programs are becoming the norm for an increasing number of women who recognize that caring for the environment is an investment in the future. The influence of women on the environmental agenda goes far beyond household management. They actively participate in public initiatives, create environmental organizations, advocate for the adoption of legislation aimed at protecting the environment, and work in scientific and governmental structures that develop sustainable development strategies. Women scientists, engineers, and activists make invaluable contributions to finding innovative solutions in the fields of renewable energy, waste management, and biodiversity protection. Russia, with its rich natural resources and vast territories, understands the potential of consequences of environmental issues. We acknowledge that these problems can all be solved together by expanded international cooperation in this important area. So, we We therefore welcome the G20's commitment under Brazil's presidency to actively work on the track of climate and environmental sustainability. We see this agenda as a platform for constructive, friendly dialogue aimed at developing meaningful, concrete solutions in the field of environmental protection. At the same time, we opposite to politicization and various manipulations to satisfy selfish interests. Mutually respectful cooperation to achieve a reasonable balance between environmental protection activities and socio-economic development will facilitate the search for compromise solutions and effective responses to climate change. Only through joint efforts based on scientific data and principles of justice can we achieve real ecological sustainability and ensure prosperity for all. To reduce its impact on the climate, Russia aims to achieve carbon neutrality by 2060. A comprehensive set of measures has been implemented with goals in the field of green energy, fully integrated into strategic documents. The structure of the energy sector in our country is already one of the greenest in the world. Nearly 40% comes from nuclear and hydro energy, and the hydrogen energy development concept has been adopted. The use of solar and wind energy is expanding. Serious attention is being paid to ecological sustainability. Since 2019, the national project Ecology has been implemented to address issues related to waste, air, water, and biodiversity. Women play both leadership and organizational roles in the implementation of the tasks outlined in this document. These tasks align with the provisions of the final declaration of the first meeting of women parliamentarians of the G20, the Alagoas Charter, which concerns the inclusion of climate and environmental issues in national and state programs. I would like to specifically highlight the involvement of women's communities and women leaders in the decision-making process in this area. We accept that they will actively participate in the 11th Nevsky International Ecological Congress, which will take place in Russia in 2025. The business program is currently being developed, covering a wide range of topics and bringing together all stakeholders to discuss urgent environmental issues. Traditionally, representatives from foreign states participate in the discussions. I invite the participants of our today's meeting to continue discussing current issues at the Congress, which will take place in May next year in St. Petersburg. It's symbolic that it will take place in this city. This year, it has become a true capital of the global women's community, hosting representatives from over 120 countries to participate in the Eurasian Women's Forum since 2015. Большое.
Muito obrigada, senhora Tatiana Zakharova. Seu pronunciamento como membro
Thank you, Ms. Tatiana Zakharova, as part of the Parliament. Now, Ms. Maria Cerqueira from the Parliament of Portugal. You have the floor.
Obrigada a todos. Boa tarde.
Thank you to all. Good afternoon. I'd like to thank Brazil's invitation through his president, Arthur Lira, where this event of women and where women have voice in the G20, and this is a fundamental step. I'd like to extend my greetings for the Secretariat of Women and all women that are part of this panel and this important discussion. In fact, the issue of equality, climate change, and other challenges of sustainability are impossible to go back in the world. Europe and Portugal are no exceptions. So in discussion, we have to be concerned. Portugal, as part of the European Union, but also with the special relationship with the Portuguese-speaking languages and African countries, have great experience with sustainable development, and through the G20, the 2030 agenda of the UN, and zero poverty, gender equality, and other policies, we are very committed to this agenda of reducing poverty and gender equality, because we all can have a more democratic, fair world for all if we are able if united as a whole, as an international community, in seeking more social justice for women and this sustainable development with gender perspective, we have to be very concerned, but it's not much, if we should refer and to reinforce this message in how fundamental it is that we have attention, and especially during the pandemic. It was women and girls were the first to suffer poverty, unemployment, and insecurity in access to education and new food. And therefore, this has, in fact, to make us alert to this reality. And it goes through giving women the possibility of participating in dealing with climate change. In Portugal, and repeating a little bit what we said in Maceió, but it's not bad repeating, all of our activity is marked by the European Pact, but at the national level, by the laws in terms of combating climate change. These are national norms, and the issue of the protection of the climate base has constitutional representation and has this dignity. So it's a great commitment, but we cannot disattach this from agriculture, from development, from planning of the territories and land use. And we have a vision that is bipartisan of what is sustainable. We want to talk about precision agriculture, creating more food with less space use, but also with more quality and reduction of pesticides, water use that is more efficient, and less and reduce use of water, and to avoid the loss of water. So it's not compatible with the challenges that we go through. One side, food security, which has to be the basis of all our policy of sustainability, but on the other hand, that there be quality food for all. That's one of the great challenges we face. But we have another side. We understand that economic activity has to be complementary, and in terms of territorial cohesion, not only for profit, but that men and women, boys, girls, those in less developed territory, in what we call family farms, might have a sustainable activity, and that should have government help so it be cohesive and sustainable. So we have to learn more with this balance from the so-called economy, what we call agribusiness in Brazil, but what is a sustainable agriculture, protection of species, plants, improved use of the territories, and in facing these challenges. But we also have another challenge for our girls and women, which is education. It is necessary that we have women and girls of these new generations to be taken to the highest level of education, but they be able to choose those educational projects of the future to generate more income. We need more education for women and girls, and it's in these decision centers that we need most women and girls, and so that will be the only way to have more equality of gender, which is, I think, is what we all need. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Maria Emilia Cerqueira, Representative Vice Representative of the Indian High Court, Mr. Shri Harivansh.
Honorable Chairperson and distinguished delegates, Boa tarde, good afternoon. At the outset, I greet you all on behalf of the Parliament and 1.4 billion people of India. I also take this opportunity to congratulate the Congress of Brazil for their leadership of the P20 this year and for their warm hospitality. India acknowledges that global challenges like poverty and inequality, climate change, pandemics, and conflicts disproportionately affect women and children. Therefore, there is a need to mainstream gender-responsive approaches in national policies, plans, strategies, and actions on environment, climate, biodiversity, natural resources, pollution, and disaster risk reduction. While emphasizing progress on sustainable development goals, during our G20 presidency last year, India changed the narrative from women as passive development beneficiaries to women-led development. In this context, I would like to highlight India's Namo Drone Didi program that supplies drones to 15,000 women self-help groups to rent to farmers for agriculture purposes, addresses the need to modernize the practice climate-resilient agricultural practices by placing cutting-edge technology in the hands of rural women. I would like to recall that at COP20, India presented to the world the following 5 nectar elements that's called Panchamrit of its ambitious climate action. Number 1, reach 500 gigawatt non-fossil energy capacity by 2030, 50% of its energy requirements from renewable energy by 2030, reduction of total projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tons from now to 2030, reduction of the carbon intensity of the economy by 45% by 2030 over 2005 levels, achieving the target of net zero emissions by 2070. As one of the world's fastest growing economies, India has been able to balance its growth and environmental sustainability by fostering inclusive development and growth while safeguarding environmental sustainability. The Government of India has launched many schemes and programs to scale up India's action on both the adaptation and mitigation, which envisages appropriate measures across many sectors, including water, agriculture, forest, energy, sustainable mobility, housing, waste management, circular economy, and resource efficiency, etc. The Indian Constitution underlines the need to ensure a decent standard of life and pollution-free environment as necessary conditions. Article 48A provides that a state shall endeavor to protect and improve the environment and to safeguard the forest and wildlife of the country. Article 51AG specifically stipulates, I quote, fundamental duty of the citizens to protect and improve the natural environment, which includes forests, rivers, lakes, wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures. The judiciary of India is deeply committed to the cause of safeguarding the environment. The Supreme Court has treated the right to a pollution-free environment as a part of fundamental right, Article 21, right to life. The court moved beyond the strict liability principle and established the principle of absolute liability by ensuring that industries engaged in hazardous activities bear the full cost of any harm caused. The Supreme Court of India, in a landmark judgment this year, on the protection of 2 critically endangered bird species on the International Union for Conservation of Nature, released the great Indian bustard, the lesser floricon, while safeguarding the habitat of these endangered birds, recognized that climate change impacts the constitutional right to live. India is deeply committed to upholding climate justice and reiterates the foundational principle of equity and common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. India calls on the developed countries for climate justice and for undertaking rapid reductions in emissions during the current decade so as to reach net zero much earlier than their announced dates, as they have used more than their fair share of the depleting global carbon budget. As parliamentarians, we must resolve to facilitate the creation and promotion of multi-stakeholder and multi-level forums led by women to support grassroots women's rights organizations to lead climate and environment-related initiatives. Thank you. Obrigado.
Obrigada ao senhor. Passo a palavra à senhora Mikateko Golden Malauli, membro da Câmara Baixa do Parlamento da África do Sul. Ao senhor, perdão, está grafado errado aqui, eu peço desculpas.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. In the world we live in today, any adverse condition immemorial, affected in a devastating way our women and children. Climate change has become one of the adverse crises the world is grappling with today and going to the future. Women and children continue to be the most vulnerable, and that is why when we're facing what we have termed as climate crisis, we need to be practical and talk about climate justice and gender equality, because the two can never be separable. Climate change has to be a justice issue. It must be a justice issue because its very existence is by far driven by social inequalities. If you take a look around the globe, most politically and economically marginalized communities use far less fossil fuel-based energy, and the poor feels the ultimate impact unequally compared to the rich who have unfettered access to medical services and adaptation measures. It is clear to me that there can never be climate justice if the poor and politically marginalized are not included in policy-making decisions to reduce emissions and adaptation. The sad reality is that there is no genuine willingness from developed countries to address climate change because they know that reducing on the use of fossil fuels could eliminate the economic growth that has produced their prosperity. Part of the commitment South Africa made in the Paris Agreement was to prepare and submit nationally determined contribution periodically, and such NDCs would have to be progressive over time. The updated NDC in 2021 commits to 31% reduction and a fixed target for greenhouse gas emission levels by 2025 and 2030 respectively. It also has set goal to reach the net zero emission by 2050. Our national determined contribution, which was updated in 2021, clearly indicates that our just transition to low carbon and climate resilient economy would need 1.5 trillion rands over the period of 5 years, which developed countries committed to assist with. So far, we have only received 9.1 billion in pledges and not real money. Ladies and gentlemen who are married here and would know that on their wedding days, they made a pledge to love their partners in sickness and in health till death do them part. How many of us in this room have lived to our pledges? Surely not all of us. And you know why? It's because a pledge is just as good as a promise, which you either fulfill and not fulfill. What I'm trying to say here is that those who are pushing us to move with their desired speed to decarbonize must put money where their mouths are. The lack of resources not only exacerbate existing gender inequalities, but also poses distinct threat to well-being, health and safety of women and children, especially a girl child. In a country such as South Africa, already grappling with poverty, inequality, unemployment, and dependence on natural resources, these issues heighten the vulnerability of women and girls in the face of climate-related challenges. Over the years, South Africa has taken steps to address gender disparities within the climate change narrative, the integration of gender into national climate policies and initiatives, as outlined in the National Climate Change Response White Paper, signifies a commitment to inclusivity and empowerment. As we move forward, it is imperative not to only recognize the tension between development and environmental protection, but also to actively engage in mitigating this tension. We must promote sustainable practices, especially within the unique context of developing countries, where socio-economic challenges often present contrasting priorities. This underscores the need for development nations to recognize the historical roles they made. By the way, my delegation from South Africa, who are females, said it takes a thief to catch a thief. Because I'm a man, in a world that is dominated by men, we are sending you to fight our wars to emancipate women around the world. And I hope that I represented them well to catch a thief, because I'm a thief as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Pass the floor to the Brazilian Secretary of Women of the House of Representatives, Benedita da Silva. And then we will pass to the Senator Leila Barros. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. It is a great honor to be participating again of this space. A few months ago, we were gathered in Maceió to discuss points of reforming the global governance, the climate crisis, inequality, and the obstacles to the political participation and social participation of women. Among the recommendations that the Charter of Maceió does, we suggested to the governments of our nations to develop agendas and legislative proposals, as well as to conduct sensitive reforms, including those related to gender and climate. Among the objectives of these proposals, we must also include the strengthening of the human rights of women and girls in their diversity, and the promotion of the principles of the non-discrimination principles and equality before the law. As a Brazilian member of the Parliament, I admit that our battles are not easy. We fought 20 years for the labor rights for the domestic workers, many decades to approve the statute of racial equality. And I continue in this daily fight in order to build it brick by brick and lay down the foundations so that the most vulnerable people of our country, because they need to experience a more decent life. In this regard, as a parliament members of the countries from the richest countries of the planet, I find it opportune to remember that the climate disasters that we have watched disproportionately affect women, children, and elders, and other vulnerable populations. 4 months ago, we saw in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, in the Brazilian territory, we saw the big floods that were there for over a month, leading to dozens of deaths and billions of reais in terms of loss. After that situation, the rivers of the Amazon were dry in a way that had never seen before. 2 of our main biomes, the Pantanal and the Cerrado, experienced big fires for many months, leading to huge material damage and incalculable loss in terms of biodiversity. But floods and fires are not exclusively found in Brazilian territory. We recently saw the Spanish city which was flooded. Houses were burning in many countries of South America. We saw hurricanes. We saw many phenomena. We know that riverside populations, indigenous quilombola populations, and the peripheral populations of the cities are always the most affected ones in case of calamities. Children and the elders are those who die first. Women are the biggest responsible for finding food and providing care to their family members and neighbors. And they are also the ones who need to cope with the situation of families. The shelters and public tents which receive those who immigrate to safer areas. Our P20 meeting takes place in a crucial moment when climate change is already a proven reality by science and perceived on a daily basis by citizens. From the Brazilian Parliament, we have been working with this topic seriously and responsibly. There are bills that seek to harmonize socio-economic development and environmental protection. The measures include integrated management of fire, the regulation of agricultural activities, and policies to foster environmental conservation, such as the payment for environmental services, access to credit for sustainable activities, and the inclusion of women in ecotourism initiatives, sustainable agriculture, and management of water resources. These measures recognize the crucial role played by women of traditional communities, rural communities, in sustainable management. Among others, we saw in the discussion in our parliament the assurance of the right to health of the African Brazilian population, covering economic policies to decrease the risk of diseases and contribute to eradicate environmental racism. The global moment requires from us, members of parliaments, the transformation of perspectives in order to build policies that approach climate change in order to ensure social and economic justice. I reaffirm my willingness and that of all parliament women of the G20 to discuss and find solutions for the climate crisis, the economic crisis that occurs in our planet. Thank you very much.
Thank
you, Congresswoman Benedita da Silva. Greetings for your coordination. Now, Ms. Leila Barros from the Brazilian Federal Senate.
Obrigada, senhora presidente dessa
Thank
sessão
you,
de trabalho,
President,
Maria do Rosário, senhoras
Ambassador
e
Maria
senhores
do Rosário,
parlamentares e todos que nos acompanham.
Parliamentarians and all others that are following us. We are facing a global challenge that goes beyond borders, gender,
No
class.
entanto, devemos reconhecer
However, we
que seus
must
efeitos,
recognize
por
that these
vezes
effects,
devastadores, são
sometimes
profundamente
devastating,
desiguais,
are
impactando
unequal,
mais intensamente
impacting
as
more
populações em
intensely
situação de
the populations in
dos quais,
vulnerability,
infelizmente,
which
se
unfortunately
destacam as
would
mulheres
like to
e
highlight
meninas
women and
espalhadas em
girls
vários cantos do
spread
planeta,
all over the planet,
especialmente
especially
aquelas que vivem em contexto de
that
vulnerabilidade
live
extrema,
in extreme
com a privação dos
vulnerability
seus direitos
with
mais
privation of their most fundamental rights.
mundo justo e
To
planeta
build a fair world and a sustainable planet
superar,
shouldn't be an
mas sim
obstacle,
a base natural
but the
das
natural
nossas ações e
basis for our
decisões.
actions and
Nossa
decisions.
discussão nessa
Our
sessão,
discussion in this session,
não é apenas sobre
therefore,
mitigar os
is not
efeitos
only
da
about
mudança
mitigation of climate
mas sim
change,
sobre garantir
but
que a
guaranteeing
justiça climática
that climate change
seja uma realidade para
will
todos,
be a
com
reality
especial atenção às mulheres e às
to all,
meninas,
and especially
que
women and
representam a
girls
esperança
that represent the hope and the strength of our
Essa
communities.
sessão de trabalho que
This
promove a
working
justiça
session that
climática e o
promotes climate
desenvolvimento
justice
sustentável
and
sob a
sustainable
perspectiva de
development
gênero
from
e
a
raça,
gender and race
reforça a
perspective
importância
reinforces
de
the
colocarmos
importance
esses
of
temas
putting these
no
themes
centro das
in the
nossas
center
agendas.
of our agendas.
julho deste ano,
In July
na
of this
primeira
year,
reunião de
in the
mulheres
first
parlamentares
women's
do P20
Parliamentarian
realizada em
Women's
Maceió,
Meeting in Maceió,
aprovamos a Carta de
we
Alagoas.
approved the Charter of Alagoas.
Esse documento histórico
This historical
define recomendações
document
claras
defines
para promover a
clear
igualdade
recommendations to promote
fortalecer a
gender
resiliência
equality
de mulheres
and
e
improve the
meninas em face
resilience
às
of
mudanças
women
do
and
clima.
girls
Ponto central
in
da
terms of
Carta
climate change.
é a necessidade
So
de
this
direcionar
charter is the need to
para
direct
políticas
investments
climáticas
to climate
sensíveis ao
change
gênero.
policies that are gender
Precisamos de
sensitive.
financiamento
We
público
need public
que apoie a
financing
criação
that supports the
de sistemas de
creation
cuidado acessíveis
of accessible
e que promovam
care
a segurança
systems
econômica
and promote
e
economic
principalmente
security
a sustentabilidade
and
das
the
mulheres e meninas.
sustainability of
No Brasil,
women
como em
and
tantos
girls.
outros países,
Brazil, like
a
in
mulher
many
tem
other
papel
countries, the
essencial no
woman
combate à
has
fome,
an essential
à
role in
pobreza e
combating
à
hunger,
desigualdade.
poverty, and
Quase metade
inequality.
dos lares
Almost
brasileiros
half of
são
Brazilian
liderados
homes
por mulheres
are led by
que,
women
por sua vez,
that
conhecem
on
de
their
perto
way
o desafio
know
de
very
garantir o
closely the
sustento
challenge
familiar.
of guaranteeing
Desse total,
food to their families.
60% são mulheres
60%
negras.
are black
Essa
women.
experiência fortalece
This
seu
experience
compromisso
strengthens
com o
their
equilíbrio
commitment
climático,
to climate change
reconhecendo
balance
a interdependência
and to recognize
entre
the
o cuidado da
interdependence
família
in taking care of the family and care
Nossa
with nature.
responsabilidade, senhora presidente,
Our responsibility,
enquanto
dear President, as parliamentarians,
nossa
is to
posição para
use
adotar
our
e promover
position to adopt
legislações
and promote
que não
legislation
apenas reconheçam,
that not only
mas que
recognizes
tratem com
but
eficiência
also
as
treats
desigualdades
with
agravadas pelas
efficiencies
crises
and
ambientais.
equality these climate crisis and points the urgent need of policies that value non-paid work that is essential in times of crisis and carried out mostly by women. This recognition can transform the way in which our society responds to climate change events that are extreme. Beyond local, international cooperation is indispensable. In this context, the B20 offers us a unique platform to join forces and to pressure for global commitments that respect and promote the contribution of women in fighting against climate change. It's important to reinforce that you have a fair transition that is inclusive, that considers not only women, indigenous people, black people, but puts these people as protagonists of this process. We should seek and promote policies that incentivize the active participation of women, and climate change means that women should be on the decision process from the beginning until implementation. Only in that way are we able to create a transition that is really inclusive, that protects our biodiversity, and in facing poverty and assures gender equality. Our normative structure in Brazil has legislation that deal with climate change and gender and race in generic means, in protection of vulnerable people in an ample way that it is also inclusive. But we need more. We need affirmative action in that sense. I will close here. It's in the same purpose, but also thanking everyone for the opportunity.
Thank you, Senator Leila. Congratulations for the work of the Senate. We are now closing the first panel, and I'd like to thank all speakers, men and women, and Mrs. Axon, who was here with us in the coordinating the work, and our Brazilian colleagues as well. But above all, this highlight that the speeches that we heard here reinforced, they strengthened the document that was approved in Maceió, and point to the G20 and P20 that at each edition it should value and recognize the participation of women, parliamentary women, as a way of producing a fairer and more just world and a sustainable planet, which is our proposal of discussions here. I also highlight from our Maceió Charter, item 7, with which we commit to that the states members of the G20 and P20 will recognize the central role of the economic rights of women and their economic empowerment, so we can attain the 2030 agenda and a set of actions related also with sustainable development. Thus, I'd like to thank for the follow-up that we had on this panel, and I will now pass to the next panel, which will begin as the second session of the G20 Parliamentary Forum with the theme Women in Power, Increasing Female Representation in Decision-Making Spaces. I declare the closing of the first panel, and I invite already the secretary of the next panel, and I invite to coordinate the next panel. Is she here? Senator Leila. And Senator Dorinha, is she here with us? Dorinha Rezende. So Senator Dorinha Rezende will be coordinating, will be chairing the second panel. Thank you very much.
Lá no Senado. Lá no Senado. A gente já está com o microfone. Declaro aberta a segunda sessão.
Declare the opening of the second working session of the G20 Parliamentary Forum Summit with the topic Women in Power, Increasing Female Representation, Women's Representation in Decision-Making Spaces. Members of this panel, together with me, I'd like to announce the President of the UIP, Mrs. Tulia Axen, IPU.
Senhoras e senhores,
ladies and gentlemen, it is with serenity and hope, expecting better days, that I take up the presidency of this session, the chairmanship. And the topic is the extremely urgent need to expand feminine women's representation in decision-making spaces. As regards our topic, the expansion of women's representativeness in political spaces, we will continue from the point that we reached in Maceió during the first summit of parliamentary women under P20. I speak of the fundamental recommendations to ensure the expansion of the women's presence in power positions. By resuming this topic today, we corroborate the commitment of continuing these guidelines in order to attain practical actions, palpable actions resulting from these recommendations. We need a legal framework to encourage and ensure the presence of women at all decision-making levels. By incorporating the guidelines of the Alagoas Charter in the national agendas, we reaffirm the commitment of building more equitative and representative systems. One only creates leadership by enabling access to political leadership. It needs to be accessible for women in all spheres of life, especially in those in which representativeness is historically low. The successful initiatives of other countries must be duly known by our leaders so that they can also become part of the legislative dialogue at the highest levels of our country. The construction of an international mutual support network is also essential for this resolutive dialogue in order to comply with our central aim, which is to expand or amplify power spaces for women in politics. I'd like to strengthen here the increasing representativeness in women's political representativeness, which is and must be a common goal of all countries that are members of the G20. Our commitments not only with the fight for equality. Henceforth, it is also with the construction of decision-making arrangements that genuinely reflect our diversity and our needs. The expansion of women's representation in decision-making spaces must strengthen our democracies and our ability to build a more balanced future in which we all, men and women, with economically sustainable, socially just. I'd like to clarify that each speaker will be able to use the floor for up to 5 minutes. In order to ensure the commitment of our agenda, I reiterate that system of audio of the plenary, which is programmed for ringing the bell 30 seconds before the end of the time of each speaker, as a warning so that he or she may finish their speech. I also ask everyone to speak slowly so that the simultaneous interpreters can work properly. I thank you for your cooperation and collaboration with these rules, and we will continue now with our session. I now grant the floor to the first speaker of the list, Mrs. Raymonde Gagné, President of the High Chamber of the Canadian Parliament.
Cher Président et Présidente de Parlement, chers collègues parlementaires, distingués invités. C'est un grand plaisir d'être parmi vous aujourd'hui. Je tiens d'ailleurs à remercier nos hôtes brésiliens pour leur accueil chaleureux. Le sujet de cette deuxième séance me tient à cœur. En effet, l'objectif d'accroître la participation des femmes
to increase women's participation in decision-making bodies, including in active politics, is very important to me. In Canada, women hold nearly 55% of the seats in the Senate and 30.6% of the seats in the House of Commons. In fact, the representation of women in the Senate reached a historic record during the current legislature, with a peak of 56% of women senators. In the House of Commons, 30.6% is the absolute record for women's representation. Despite this progress, Canada ranks 67th in the world in terms of women's representation in the lower or single houses of national parliaments. It is important to note that there are no quotas for women's representation applicable to all political parties in Canadian elections. This is partly due to the first-past-the-post voting system used in federal elections, which makes it difficult to reserve seats for specific groups. However, in Canada, senators are appointed by the Governor General on the recommendation of the Prime Minister. For this reason, women's representation has historically been higher in the Senate than in the House of Commons. This is also the case of other groups that have been historically underrepresented in the Commons, such as indigenous people. In addition, the current federal government has established criteria for evaluating candidates to fill vacancies in the Senate. These criteria stipulate that the gender of individuals will be taken into consideration in order to achieve a balance between men and women. There are still obstacles that can prevent women from participating in decision-making bodies. Consider, among other things, parliamentary culture and gender-based violence against women in politics. In her annual report published in 2021, the Special Representative for Gender Issues of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe indicates that this gender-based violence does not only have physical and psychological effects, it is also a direct attack on women's freedom of expression and a threat to democracy. Some women cite as an example the lack of conditions conducive to work-family balance within Parliament. This regime allows This is why several gender-sensitive initiatives that promote family life for parliamentarians have been implemented in the Parliament of Canada in recent years. For example, the very first parental leave plan for MPs was created a few years ago. This regime allows members of parliament who are caring for a newborn or newly adopted child to be absent for up to 12 months after the birth of adoption of their child, provided that the member continues to work in their constituency. In addition, it has determined that the presence of young children in the House is permitted, provided that it does not cause disruption or inconvenience, and that the proceedings of the House can continue as normal. Women's political participation is an issue that is being studied in the Parliament of Canada. In 2019, the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women presented its report entitled Vote Her Out, a roadmap to increase the representation of women in Canadian politics. The report contained 14 recommendations aimed at improving the representation, retention and experiences of women in electoral politics in Canada. In addition, to ensure a safe environment for parliamentarians, the Senate and the House of Commons have adopted or updated various policies against harassment, including sexual harassment. In February 2021, the Senate Standing Committee
Para concluir, 30 segundos.
30 seconds to the conclusion.
Alors, j'ai cité quelques exemples, mais une autre, je pense, politique importante du Sénat qui mérite d'être mentionnée, c'est la politique du Sénat sur la prévention du harcèlement et de la violence, qui est extrêmement important pour éviter justement l'intimidation des femmes parlementaires au Sénat où il y a eu déjà des actes d'intimidation. Alors, tout ça pour nous dire que nos démocraties...
So I'd like to say that to add up about the Senate's rule, as we've had cases of harassment.
I will hand over to Selmira Sacramento, the President of the São Tomé and Príncipe Parliament.
I congratulate the panel and thank for the organization's members for the invitation. The presence of women in decision-making spaces is crucial for the construction of a healthy and inclusive democracy, because representativeness is not limited only to figures, but also entails giving voice and visibility to different perspectives, experiences, which enrich the public discussions. Equitative access of women to power position is fundamental, so we may advance towards a society which is more just and equalitarian. On the other hand, it is fundamental to create support networks and mentorship programs to offer tools, necessary tools to women for the development of their skills in the political field and to strengthen their self-trust. By establishing clear goals for the inclusion of women, the political parties and public institutions can express a greater diversity and in their discussions and also in their decisions, because expanding the women's representative in decision-making spaces is a challenge that requires the concerted action by all of us, considering that the women's empowerment is not only an issue of social justice, but also a need for the construction of more efficacious and wide-ranging policies. In this regard, the culture and social norms perform a crucial role in the participation of women in politics. Oftentimes, we are confronted with stereotypes of gender which restrict the women's aspirations and perpetuate the idea that politics is something for men. Hence, I am of the opinion that in order to overcome such reality, it is imperative to promote awareness-raising campaigns that challenge and reconfigure these norms. It's necessary to invest in education and the empowerment of women in leadership areas and decision-making areas in politics. In addition to culture and social norms, it is also fundamental to consider the importance of adopting quota policies, which have proven to be an effective tools to ensure the increase in the women's representativeness in political positions. But it is important that these quotas are not seen as a mere formality, but also as a necessary step in order to correct historical disparities which have restricted the access of women to power. Your Excellencies, I believe that if we are able to connect support networks to change social norms and implement quota policies, we will take a decisive step towards a more equal and inclusive future. It is therefore urgent that we will all be committed with this cause, recognizing that the full-fledged participation of women at all decision-making levels enriches our democracies and enriches the social fabric. Thank you very much.
I would like to invite Carolina Cerqueira from the Congress or the Parliament of Angola. Speakers of the parliaments, ladies and gentlemen, my thanks for the opportunity to be able to speak before you. I am the first president of the parliament of my country, which shows a unique development in terms of Angola. The Angolan parliament has 87 congresswomen with a 39.5% representativity, with the Commission of Defense and Security as well as Economy and Finances are presided by women. Our country is in the 25th ranking of female representation in parliaments. Ladies and gentlemen, my country has two interesting particularities. First is that women are 51% of a population of 36 million, with 30.4% of families are led by women. The second is one of the youngest countries in the world, with an average age of 17 and a birth rate of 4 children per woman, which leads us to great challenges as regards women's and teens' education and the guaranteeing basics, health and social protection. Angola, for gender equality, is to guarantee a greater equity of opportunities, rights and responsibilities between men and women. But we put a budget that is sensitive to gender, and it is a solid commitment with the transparency and equity as regards gender. Ladies and gentlemen, I consider it opportune to make some references to the African women's in decision-making. In almost all the African continent, there are barriers to the practicing of citizenship due to culture, culture and tradition that stops women from qualification and education, which has a heavy negative impact on future generations and means that women to occupy political positions have to go against gender stereotypes, that women only got into that position due to merit. So what can we do to transform the reality in Angola, in some African countries that face the same challenges? It is crucial the approval of laws that bring gender quotas in political and administrative positions, be it the local or the leadership of state companies and strategic sectors. And is also essential to establish robust mechanisms of implementation the zebra rules, which is an alternate between men and women in the party list. We also consider important the existence of training programs for female candidates can develop their capabilities in leadership and management of electoral campaigns. This can be done establishing in laws and rules of electoral financing the obligatory that parties should destine a small percentage of funds for these programs. Also, the important is the creation of incentives to contract women in sectors that are majority male. And the public sector in our countries can lead this change, incentivizing the entrance of women in areas like engineering, mathematics, politics, and national security. In this subject, it is important to count on international support in financing scholarships for young and girls in developing countries and strengthening technical training that is oriented towards women. To summarize, we should train women with the necessary means to transform their dreams in reality and to assure our right to occupy the decision-making agencies and to promote and preserve peace that is so threatened these days. We need to continue to use our voice and bring girls, youth, and teens to our side so that they do not only follow, but they build their own path. I'd like to end saying that the old president of Liberia, a Nobel Peace Prize winner, Ellen Johnson, who said, "The size of your dreams should always go beyond your capability to reach. If your dreams do not scare you, they are not big enough." Thank you.
Carolina Cerqueira. I now invite Mrs. Fabiana Martin, the President of the Mercosur Parliament.
Buenas tardes, estimados colegas. Es un honor para mí hoy.
Thank you, dear colleague. It's an honor for me in this so meaningful meeting talk to you as the first president women for the Mercosur Parliament since its creation. We are together in this working session not only to analyze the advances we got in the female representation in the decision-making spaces, but also to think about the challenges we have to face ahead and also face, for instance, the effectiveness of the exercise of our roles in the power and also to inspire ourselves mutually in the way we are walking. Today more than ever, we need a robust female presence in all levels, in all the process of decision-making process. Our diversity, our experiences, our perspectives and abilities are critical to approach all the problems that our society face. But I would like to make something very clear. It's a personal opinion, and I think all women here will follow me. We are not the same. We are wonderfully different and needed and necessarily different. It's exactly this difference, the one ones that gives us the support that was given in the way that those parliament that have in its majority women in the chairs can pass bills and have public policies that improve our society's life. The representativeness is not only a matter of justice, but also the efficiency and social progress. As it was said in the post of the role of women within parliaments, improving the life quality of our society. This is the main axle. In the Mercosur countries, we have fulfilled many advances. Argentina, Republic with the equity gender law, it's not the same of the space of gender, grow the approval of 45% in our parliament. In other countries of this region, Uruguay, for instance, they have reached around 23% of the female representativeness in its parliament, what shows a wonderful progress. But even though it's not enough, Brazil itself has seen a growth in the participation of women with 18% of women participation in the parliament. Paraguay also have done some meaningful efforts, but they face challenges related to the effectiveness of publics for equity and participation. Last September, we had the first parliament summit of Mercosur, and this is a sign and a very important symbol for the Parliament in this work that we have decided to face together since this block to then we would have gender equity in all Mercosur parliaments. But we faced some circumstances that we know and also some challenge that we have ahead. We know that the education and empowerment of our girls and the youth makes that them accept the great challenges of leadership. The evidence of we have represented where the education, the high school education in girls and the youth, they can develop better when they have to face leadership spaces. And the public policies, we know that it's fight and struggle for the gender equity or gender parity. This is what the Argentina have ensuring almost 50%, but besides these 2 points, there is something that is very close to us and our activity as women, and this is what we have to develop. The support and solidarity network, the visibilization and recognition of the triumph of another women, push ourselves, empower ourselves, and highlight the work done by women that reach this space. The personal commitment and also the collective commitment as women. I would like to remind you, it's just a short time, but I would like to remind what I said in the Women's Summit, and it's very important for me. The only way to reach the gender parity, and I always put as an example the Argentinian Republic, women together, united, without taking into account their political party difference. They work in a common policy to reach this parity law. Would be great if we would reach this soon in the market.
Thank
you, dear Fabiana Martin.
Lícia Ronchuli, vice-presidente da Câmara Alta do Parlamento da Itália.
To the Mr. Lícia.
Obrigada, Presidente.
Grazie, President. Thank you, President. It's an honor to be here representing my country. We are here not only as representatives of our nations, but as custodians of ideals that go beyond cultures. Because when we talk about women in power, we cannot not talk about equal opportunities. One of the main points, this should be a continuous dialogue in all the organizations. Gender equality should be something in all societies, important in all societies. Italy has done many important things. In 1948, just 5% of women was represented in the parliament. Today, after years of achievement, we have arrived at about 33%. This has been achieved with the introduction of measures such as the electoral law of 2017, where gender parity in political representation is guaranteed, ending an injustice that took a long time to end. 2 years ago, we have seen an epochal change when Giorgia Meloni was elected the first prime minister. This has been something very important in our Republican history after 64 governments headed by men. I want to talk about the commitments of the G7 under the Italian presidency last June. We promoted the economic empowerment, work-life balance, and to guarantee also the participation in decisive spheres. We need to overcome stereotypes of gender. I am pleased today to be able to offer these insights from the Italian G7 so that the Brazilian G20 can take them on board. We live in a society that calls itself modern, but women, they have many difficulties to have gender parity. It is fundamental that we work together to build policies that make women able to build their own independence and choose their own future. Because it's not only opportunities that women don't have, but also that society loses because of that. A strong element is financial education. I'm convinced that this is one of the obstacles to women's empowerment. The Italian Parliament has invested in the future of generations, introducing last year education, financing, teaching in schools of all levels, because it's fundamental that these knowledge should be acquired as soon as possible, because the girls from today that have economic skills will be women tomorrow, able to make decisions, informed decisions, improving their safety and sitting at the same tables with men. We all know that there is a long way ahead of us, and we need to use all the we should
perché soltanto con l'uguaglianza di genere potremo costruire una società più equa e più prossima. Grazie, obrigada.
Convido a senhora Blanca Margarita Overlarde
Duarte, President of the International Parliamentarians.
Good afternoon. I greet the board And I would like also to congratulate the initiative of this meeting that invite us to reflect about this so important topic for the world. And I would like to invite you to remember that in the 90s, the UNESCO has impulsionated a very good dialogue about peace. There was this editorial reflection, and the directors, they were visiting the different countries to talk about that. And Nelson Mandela said to Federico Mayor Saragossa, saying, Federico, the culture of peace will not be established in the world. The hunger will not stop. The inequality will still keep growing. And if at least in the smallest amount of time, at least at 20% of time, if this is not done by women, if women don't take decisions, we will not stop with these problems. So many of the solutions we have in the world, they come from men in the power spaces, and this is moderated by men. That's how we are used to live. And we have in science, they have the science, the knowledge, and the productive applications of all the knowledges. This majestuous knowledge that scare us in the way of producing the goods and services and solving all the problems. That's what men do. But how much oppression, suffering, and hunger there is with that. So we need to improve the governance. We need to make that democracy can also be permeated with the social justice offered to each one of us. Democracy is about equity, it's about equality. And in this milestone, women are called to participate and to offer a different type of leadership, more committed with the destiny and the fate of the others. This bureaucracy in the government that sometimes we are making all the processes to be slow. We should have a mother that understands that fever cannot wait, that the education conditions that are getting worse and worse, they are irreversible and they cannot wait. And we are creating a second level generation. And in the Americas, we need to think of a solution. In the Inter-American Parliament, we have impulsionated the network of the gender equality, and we are impulsionating the initiative to work for the empowering of women so that the political participation can be attractive to the women, so that they can find in this a way to have channel all their strengths and all their desires to change the world. So participating in these activities is not only for men, because men not only always they solve the problems. And in America, we need to empower women, we need to train women, and we understand this culture of transition that's happening because of the positions that women are occupying. And for example, I see that myself, I am fruit of that. If it wasn't for that, I worked here. And in Latin America, we're arriving to 25% of women that are arriving to the power, and this is apparently is improving a lot. But there is still much to be done to have the equity, so we can achieve the spaces of power, so that we can put the footprint of women. And it's important that we don't forget of hope. We women, we have to do something different with politics. We don't have to have the same same vices, because when we get to power, when we have the possibility of doing so, we get the same vices of men. And to govern the nations, we need to have a bigger transparency, accountability, probity, and ethics in the exercise of politics. And in the parliament, we also have a tool that's very important. We have a comparisons with a spreadsheet comparison in which we can see how we advance, and we can see how we can analyze our successes. And this access to the power is a topic at this moment. It should not be a topic. but it's something that should spur us to keep fighting. That's always spurring us to keep fighting. Thank you so much.
Muito obrigada, senhora Blanca Margarita.
Thank you, Ms. Blanca Margarida. I would like to call Ayman Al-Jibrin from the Saudi Arabian Parliament.
السيدات والسادة، السلام عليكم. لقد أظهر الاجتماع التاريخي الأول للبرلمانيات في دول العشرين أن زيادة تمثيل المرأة في أماكن صنع القرار هدف للجميع، إلا أن ما أود أن أركز عليه اليوم هو كيف يمكن أن تحقيق هذا الهدف دون أن نترك أحدا وراءنا. كما تعلمون فإن هناك اختلافات بارزة بين دول العالم، لذا فإن من واجبنا كبرلمانيين الحرص على تطوير خطة شاملة تخاطب احتياجات مجتمعاتنا المحلية وتظهر فهما عميقا واحتراما واضحا لقيمها لنحظى بتأييد الجميع. وعليه فإنني أرغب مشاركتكم بمسيرتنا المتواضعة والدروس التي تعلمناها منذ انضمام المرأة إلى مجلس الشورى السعودي. في عام 2013 صدر أمر ملكي بتغيير نظام مجلس الشورى الذي كان محصورا على الرجال لتكون نسبة تمثيل المرأة فيه لا تقل عن 20% من المقاعد. هذا القرار التاريخي ساهم في دخول 30 امرأة إلى المجلس، مشكلا مرحلة هامة نحو المساواة بين الجنسين. ومنذ ذلك التاريخ شهدت المملكة العربية السعودية موجة من التغيير الإيجابي في أوضاع المرأة، إذ كانت أبسط الأفعال كفتح النقاش حول قضية ما تحت القبة كفيلة بأن تحرك الرأي العام وتكسب المرأة دعم زملائها من الرجال داخل المجلس وفي الحكومة لتحسين الأنظمة ووضع الضمانات التي تكفل صنع بيئة آمنة وداعمة لصعود المرأة نحو أماكن السلطة في أوساط العمل. لقد أثمر تضافر الجهود عن تعديلات كبيرة وإيجابية في الأنظمة المؤثرة على عمل المرأة. فعلى سبيل المثال تم رفع الحظر على قيادة النساء وإقرار بنظام مكافحة جريمة التحرش وعمل العديد من التعديلات على نظام العمل لتضمن إجازة مدفوعة الأجر للنساء عند الوضع تصل إلى 10 أسابيع و3 أيام مدفوعة الأجر للزوج لمرافقة الزوجة عند الوضع، وحق الأمهات العاملات في ساعة رضاعة يوميا، وتوفير حضانات مجانية للأطفال في أماكن العمل التي يزيد فيها عدد النساء عن 100 امرأة، وإجازة مدفوعة الثمن مدتها 4 أشهر و10 أيام للنساء في فترة الحداد، وغيرها من التعديلات الإيجابية. ويتابع مجلس الشورى باستمرار الأداء السنوي لمبادرات تمكين المرأة التي استحدثتها الحكومة للتحقق من واقعيتها وفاعليتها في التمكين. ومن ذلك برنامج وصول الذي يقدم تخفيضا مقداره 80% على أجرة المواصلات إلى العمل للنساء، كما يشجع المجلس مبادرات العمل عن بعد وساعات العمل المرنة، مما ساعد على الوصول إلى النسبة المستهدفة لرؤية السعودية 2030 لمشاركة المرأة في سوق العمل قبل موعدها ب10 سنوات. ومن هنا فإن مجلس الشورى اليوم يعمل يدا بيد مع الحكومة لزيادة عدد القياديات، فقد تم التعاون مع الحكومة لتدريب 100 سيدة ضمن برنامج مخصص لذلك. ويسعى المجلس أيضا نحو زيادة العدد من خلال الحث على المزيد من هذه المبادرات والبرامج. السيدات والسادة، إن تجربتنا المتواضعة علمتنا بأن توفير الاحتياجات اليومية الرئيسية للمرأة ووضع الأسرة في قلب اهتمامنا نحو تمكين المرأة يسرع وصول النساء إلى أهدافهن، مما يعني أنه يتيح لهن تحقيق المزيد من الأهداف في بيئة صحية متزنة. لقد تعلمنا أيضا أن الحفاظ على نمو مستدام في هذا المجال يتطلب أن نتعاون مع الحكومة للتحقق من التطبيق الفعال للأنظمة واللوائح، إذ لا نستطيع أن نصدر الأنظمة ونتوقع نجاحها دون أن نأخذ بعين الاعتبار التحديات الأخرى على أرض الواقع. وعليه فقد علمتنا التجربة أن تمكين المرأة للوصول إلى أماكن صنع القرار يتطلب تعاون أمة بأكملها وليس المجلس فحسب. شكرا لكم.
Convido a senhora Rosa Timiris, membro da Câmara Baixa do Parlamento da Rússia.
Дорогие коллеги, искренне рада вас приветствовать.
Dear colleagues, I'm really happy to greet you. Ensuring true gender equality and the improvement of the women's position, women's status, are some of the key challenges of the global community. At the 23rd special session of the UN General Assembly, in spite of the efforts taken by all parties concerned, the provisions of these documents are still relevant and important because there is still inequality in all regions of the world, and gender stereotypes thrive as women and young girls face violence and discrimination. The Russian Federation stays true to its international obligations and reports regularly before international structures on the progress of their implementation. As part of reporting on the implementation of the agenda in the area of sustainable development for the period of up to 2030, which shows the progress that has been achieved about the women and girls. In November 2021, the 9th periodic report of the Russian Federation was discussed by the Committee of the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women on the implementation of the provisions of the respective convention. In May 2024, in the frame of the Beijing 30 process, a report from Russian Federation was received by the UN Secretariat on the implementation of the Beijing Declaration and the platform of actions. We view the UN Commission on the Status of Women as a unique forum for equal dialogue between all states of the world on the most important issues related to gender equality and women empowerment. By participating of the Commission's sessions, Russian Federation promotes its further optimization. But Russian Federation has been a member of Commission for a long time. However, in April 2023, due to anti-Russia policy, our country has lost elections in their intergovernmental organs. The issues of economic and social management, which will take place in April and May of 2028. On the 29th of December of 2022, by decree of 4356 issued by the government of the Russian Federation, a national strategy of action in the interest of women was approved for the period between 2023 and 2030, which defines the main areas of state policy on women for the midterm. This document aims to consolidate the efforts of all parties involved in order to ensure the implementation of the principle of equal rights and freedoms for men and women and to create equal opportunities for the realization. The implementation of the strategy is supervised by the Coordination Council under the government of the Russian Federation, which includes representatives of both executive and legislative powers as well as civil society. Russian women in every place are focused on full-time employment and career growth. However, an important factor for them is still their adherence to traditional family values, including the birth and the growing of children. I have 4 children, for example. Due to this, one of the priorities of the state is to create conditions for women to optimally combine family and professional life by continuing the programs on the protection of mothers, childhood, and material incentives aimed at increasing birth rate. The level of activity of Russian women is 77%. A striking example of Russia's commitment to the topic of ensuring genuine gender equality was the 4th Eurasian Women's Forum, held between the 18th and 20th of September in St. Petersburg. In this forum, there were 1,500 delegates from all the region of our countries. More than there were parliamentarians, representatives of the executive bodies, business circles, scientific community. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigada. Convido a senhora Patrícia Faro, membro do Parlamento de Portugal.
Now from Portugal. Ms. Patrícia Faro.
Muito obrigada. Cumprimento.
Thank you very much. I would like to greet the Senator and the panel.
Caras e caros colegas, senhoras,
dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it's very good to see some of the same faces here, and so I'd like to first greet the President, Arthur Lira, and all of his team for the first meeting of the women parliamentarian. It's a very hard work, and we are here to reiterate some of those proposals. So it's very good to be here once more. In Portugal, like we said in the first parliamentarian meeting in Alagoas, there is a long way to go. We don't have the representativity of women is not total, and independently of having us, the Portuguese, and that we signed into European and world, so we are, for example, the Convention Against All Discrimination Against Women, the Action Platform is another important document, the Millennium Document and the Sustainable Development that we talk so much, especially in point 5, that talks about gender equality, and the Istanbul Convention that is related to these issues of empowerment and female representation. So despite all of that, there is a sub-representation of women in political representation and decision-making positions, and independently, for example, the Portuguese example, where women have greater education and training, they're still underrepresented in decision-making positions. All of this has to do with our history. Like I said in the last meeting, the role of women that they had within the family and professional registry has left marks, and women's are still the great caretakers, domestic labor. There is a representation of women in the less well-paid jobs, and continuing the stereotypes that girls working in those professions. In terms of the global report of gender disparity, that reveals that if we continue in this rhythm, independently of the measures to be taken, it would take 123 years to have full gender equality. So it is necessary to have special measures, even if temporary, that will accelerate and install the equality between men and women, and these measures shouldn't be taken as discriminatory acts. The objective of opportunities in treatment, if once you reach this parity, as says in the CEDAW, from in 2006 with an organic law which called the parity law, that forecast 33% in the Assembly and in the European Parliament and in autarchies. In fact, it increased. This representativity was more relevant from 2019 when it changed from 33% to 45% in women and men in all political decision agencies. In Portugal, in the Republic's Assembly, we are around 38-39%. The European Parliament has gone over the 40%, and at the local level, the municipal assemblies, that we still have a lot to advance. These issues of equality in terms of representation and of decision, it is easier in public state companies than in private companies. Of course, there isn't a way you can impose, but you can do it through incentives that can deal with this issue. So how do we materialize this balance in terms of decision-making to continue to invest, to have transversality of issues, and also to invest in budgets that are gender-sensitive, that are fundamental to decide, so we can have a correct diagnostic and implementation of specific measures between men and women. So what did we talk about today? From going from words to action, and in Thomas Piketty said, an economist, but also sociologist, it's the best is possible. The past shows us how, and the future depends on what we do today. Thank you to all.
Thank you. I now invite Mrs. Soraya Santos, member of the House of Representatives of Brazil. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to congratulate the panel, especially for the Secretary of Women, Benedita, Leandra, President Dorinha, for the work that this women's bench does for the Brazilian Parliament. It is an honor to be here at this forum to approach such an urgent and essential topic, the fight for a more just and democratic society. And of course, we're speaking about parity representation in power spaces, when men and women, as well as individuals from different races, regions, and social origins have a balanced presence in the political spaces, we enable solutions that are more complete and sensitive to the needs of different groups. We need to consolidate the proposal of a governance proposal for the world, the expansion of the women's representativeness in decision-making spaces, if we want to have more encompassing and transformative policies. Leader women have been working with public policies on health, education, gender equality, and the fight against violence. And society is the winner. Here in Brazil, we have financial quota, mandatory political advertisement policies. We created, it is a crime in Brazil, gender political violence, to avoid attacks so violent against feminine campaigns, as well as to ensure the full exercise of their mandates. The prosecutors network with the three spheres of the legislative branch. We have connected, gone through Brazil, going with the practitioners of the law to strengthen and encourage and ensure the exercise of the office holders and ensure the laws that were approved on behalf of women. This year, despite a coy percentage of elected mayors, women mayors, they have left the cities with the lowest GDP, and they have moved to the big cities, which demands which shows a qualitative change in the electors. Despite all these efforts, we still have 3 states in Brazil without one single federal representative woman, and many hundreds of cities without a local representative. Our President Arthur Leila promoted the first meeting of P20 Parliamentary Women, and watching the efforts of each country to correct this distortion, we also assume the commitment of voting a legislation that may enhance the system of quotas to ensure effective chairs for all levels of the legislative branch. If democracy is representativeness of the society, then there is an unbalance in our country, and it is our duty as members of the Parliament to look at Brazil in this continental dimensions, its social and economic contrasts, and to need the urge for the necessity of new women in power spaces. The exchange of experiences of meetings such as these enable a transformation in all nations, and this is the reason for which I believe that from now on in all P20 meetings we can have this meeting of Parliament women and parliamentarians. Having women in the Parliament in power is not only a right but also a need for all countries that fight for the dignity of people. It's important to highlight that this effort must be undertaken in all powers and institutions. In 2023, the judiciary branch determined that in the merit seats in the second instance list, there may be a list only for women and an alternate list until we may find parity. After all, the House of Justice must have justice at home. Women in power positions play a crucial role in the construction of a more just and egalitarian society. Their presence in leadership roles brings new perspectives and approaches for the solving problems and promotes more inclusive policies. This is an effort of all of us as individuals, as due to the social responsibility of each institution. It is with this feeling that I especially congratulate the example of the Congress women who are here for their examples and the men who are also present, because the transformation must take place side by side between men and women. If we own this land, we must leave a legacy of a more just society where voices are heard and respected. This will only be possible thus, with the presence of men and women in all spaces. Let's work together in a network based on our countries, and I'm sure that this way we will be able to make history and leave a much better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman Soraya Santos. I would like Ms. Julieta Riquelme, member of the lower chamber of Mexico.
Dear colleagues, in this so important event to move forward with the implementation of the recommendation of the first Parliament meeting, P20 celebrated a few months ago in the city of Maceió. It's an honor for me to address myself to this assembly in the representation of the Brazilian Parliament and representing the Mexican Parliament. This space represents a valuable opportunity to reinforce our commitment with equity and the sustainable development that is reflected in diversity and empowerment of our societies. As a representative of our countries, our parliaments, we are here with the firm conviction that the climate justice is the women empowerment in the elimination of violence against women must be a global priority. In Mexico, these topics have a central place in our legislative houses and in our public policies, as a fair and sustainable society is only possible when we can ensure the plenty exercise of the women's rights. Serve to the rural population that is affected, aiming at the impacted community by the climate phenomenon receive enough and necessary resources is one of our priorities. Advance to represent inequity representation in the decision-making space. It's principle that we have in Mexico is that since the Reformation in 2019, learn at parity as a whole, we have integrated the principle of gender parity in all levels of governments. So we could make that the Congress and different public institutions and another autonomous department, the women representation is a reality. Today, the President of our Republic, it's headed by a woman, Dr. Claudia Gingampardo. This is something historical to our country that not only strengthens our democracy as well as give visibilization to the capacity and the commitment of Mexican women in the political leadership in a high level. The Mexican experience shows that the gender parity not only wide women participation but also transform the political agenda in favor to a more inclusive society. However, we are aware that advance in the parity doesn't mean that we have reached the the equity that we have. The political violence due to gender is still a threat for those that are in public places. In answer to it, in 2023, we passed the normative 2013 that impeded, that convicted people by family violence or sexual violence or with pension debits can occupy public places. This legislation that has its precedent in the general law for women access to a free life of violence that was published in 2017 is a very important advance to protect our women in a political environment and also ensure their right to a plenty participation free of violence. Dear colleagues, the challenges that we face are deep and with different faces, but we are convinced that only with legislative advances and with cooperation, international cooperation, we may overcome the gender barrier that exists to still live in our country. This summit represents a shared commitment and also an opportunity to transform our society, to walk together towards justice and gender equity in all environments. Since the Parliament, we reaffirm our commitment to this summit recommendation and also with the agreed commitment in the historical Parliament Women of P20. Gender equity is critical not only to the women's well-being but also to the sustainable development of our nation. Let's move forward. Sure that the women are critical pillar for peace, prosperity and justice in the world. Thank you.
I'd like now to invite Senator Teresa Leitão so she can come to the panel. She will be presiding the next session. I thank you for the opportunity of chairing this session on the increasing women's representation in decision-making spaces. In Brazil, this includes a big challenge regarding the presence of women in party leaderships, party leadership roles, since the construction of our presence in politics is part of the organization of the parties, and equally in the directive tables in the Brazilian politics. This is what when we speak about quota policies, and our working goal of effective chairs in the municipal, state, and national legislative houses. Nowadays in the Senate, we don't have any woman in its table, and this is the challenge that we as Brazilians must face, since we are over 50% of the population, and we are qualified and we have the conditions to be representatives. So our presence in decision-making spaces makes the entire difference in this process of construction. And then we will have the third session with the topic Fighting Gender and Race Inequalities and Promoting Women's Economic Autonomy. I declare the closing of the second session, and I now pass the chairmanship to Senator Teresa.
É esse mesmo ou esse assim? Boa noite a todas e a todos.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I declare the opening of the third working session of the G20 Parliamentary Speakers Summit with the topic Fighting Gender and Race Inequalities and Promoting Women's Economic Autonomy. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to express our enthusiasm with this strategic parliamentary forum of cooperation in our country with the aim of developing policies and strategies to tackle the challenges, the global challenges in the present and the future, among them the fight against hunger, sustainable development, and our global governance. These challenges must appreciate and urge for the presence of women with an increase in their participation in the political decisions. It was in the context of the presidency of a P20 presidency that Brazil held the first successful meeting of parliamentary women's meeting in Maceió in June 2024 with 8 recommendations arising from the discussions among the parliamentary representatives. And now we have the challenge of making headway towards implementing the recommendations of this first meeting by deepening our ties, our connections, and giving firm steps, especially in terms of fighting gender and race inequalities, and also in promoting women's economic autonomy. We have promoted a robust exchange on laws, best practices, policies, and other initiatives to cope with many challenges. And in this working session, we will be concentrating on our efforts regarding the fight against inequalities and on the promotion of women's economic autonomy, considering the results and recommendations of the previously mentioned first meeting of parliamentary women parliamentarians. In the Brazilian case, I highlight Law 14612 of 2003, which establishes equal pay of salary and remuneration criteria between men and women, which was enacted in 2023. It is an important advancement in line with the recommendation of developing agendas and legislative proposals to strengthen women's rights. I had the honor of being the rapporteur on this matter in the Senate. We have the largest transfer of income transfer program, which is Bolsa Familia, and we are debating a more just income tax law, and in addition to further investments in health and education for those who most need them, among other structural legislations. We will be thereby paving a consistent path to strengthen the role of women in the many spaces of power and the fights of women in decision-making processes and public policies. We will be promoting debates, exchanges with the voices and the imprints, the fingerprints of women towards a more fair and sustainable world, which is what must mobilize our activities. And now to begin our work, I'd like to, I say that in order to better meet our agenda and equal rights for all speakers, the system of audio of the plenary is programmed to ring the bell 30 seconds before the end of the time of each speaker as a warning, so that they can conclude their speeches, and the microphones will be turned off after 5 minutes when the floor has been used. I also ask each and everyone to speak slowly so that the live interpreters may correctly reflect the speeches. I thank you for your comprehension and understanding by each and all with these necessary rules for the good functioning of our session. Now we will continue and with our works and which have been initiated with the previous panels. And I invite to use the floor Mrs. Christel Schaldemose, which is Deputy Speaker and Vice President of the European Parliament.
Thank you very much, Senator. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for giving me the opportunity to join this essential discussion on fighting gender and racial inequalities and promoting women's economic autonomy. Today, I'm honored to join you on behalf of President for the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola. Let us be clear about what economic autonomy means. It is the right and ability of every woman to make decisions on her own financial future, free from discrimination and systemic barriers. Yet, countless women around the world, this autonomy remains out of reach. Economic autonomy is not merely an ideal, it is essential to achieving a fair, resilient economy and societies that can thrive here in the 21st century. Today, nearly half of the world's women are excluded from the formal labor market, and those who do work are often overrepresented in low-paying, insecure jobs, lacking pathways to advancement or protections that allows them to save, invest and plan. For these women, economic autonomy is still a distant goal. So to advance women's economic independence, we must address three core challenges: access to capital, equal opportunities in the labor market, and the necessary infrastructure to support women in the workforce. First, access to capital. Financial independence begins with the tools to control one's own finances. For millions of women, this means having reliable access to bank accounts, credits, and investments. We have to make it a priority to expand access to digital finance for all women, and particularly those in remote or underserved communities. Digital finance will enable women to start businesses, manage assets, and provide for their families. But we need policies that actively break down barriers for those tools. By including women in the financial system, we are not only empowering individuals, but we are also strengthening communities and national economies. Second, equal opportunity in the labor market. Economic autonomy is impossible if women's work is undervalued on their potential, or their potential is kept by barriers to leadership. And without fair wages, true autonomy is out of reach. So beyond pay equity, we need policies that actively encourage women into higher skilled sectors, leadership roles, and entrepreneurship. When women are empowered to lead and innovate, economies see new growth, and the gains of prosperities are more evenly shared. Third, supportive infrastructure. For too long, caregiving responsibilities have held back women from full economic participation. Access to affordable childcare, flexible working conditions, and robust parental leave policies are not extras. They are a prerequisite for real economic freedom. By providing these resources, we make it possible for women to remain in the workforce, balance their roles, and build the careers they envision. Without this support, women will continue to face the impossible choice between family responsibilities and professional aspirations. We have seen how addressing these three areas has tangible effects on women's economic outcomes. But we must do more, in particular, ensuring our policies protect and uplift women across all backgrounds and races. Discrimination based on race and ethnicity enlarge inequality. and hinders access to economic resources women need. As parliamentarians, it is our duty to legislate inclusively, ensuring that every woman, no matter her background, can access financial tools and protection in order to thrive. In closing, let us recognize that economic autonomy for women is an urgent investment that requires both dedication and accountability, and our policies must be more than words. They must translate into actionable, measurable changes. Only then will we build economies that value everyone equally and societies that empowers all. I invite each and one of you to make a commitment here today. Let's put women's economic autonomy in the forefront of our agendas. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now invite Mrs. Lieselinda van der Merwe, member of the lower chamber of the Parliament of South Africa.
Honourable Presiding Officers, Your Excellencies, Honourable Members, all protocol observed. It is a great honour to be amongst you today to participate in a discussion that is so close to South Africa's heart. South Africa's past is not only synonymous with overcoming painful racial inequalities, but our current focus is on that of eliminating gender inequalities. I'm proud, therefore, today to rise on behalf of South Africa's Parliament, which currently records a 45% female representation, almost at the 50-50 mark. It is evident, honourable members, that there have been notable achievements in promoting equality for women in the workplace and improving their access to economic resources amongst the countries represented here today. However, according to the World Economic Forum's 2024 Global Gender Gap Report, the world has closed just over 68% of the gender pay gap. At the current pace, it will take another 134 years, equivalent to 5 generations, for us to fully achieve gender parity. It is therefore clear that we must do much more as this P20 collective to accelerate the pace at which we eliminate structural barriers, discriminatory laws and policies, and social norms that still hinders women's full and equal participation in the economy. Honourable members, despite advances in gender equality and women's empowerment since the dawn of our democracy in South Africa in 1994, South Africa continues to grapple with gender-based inequalities. The gender pay gap and inequality in the workplace persist. According to a report released in August, 40% of households in South Africa are led by women with financial responsibilities for their families. But while women take on more responsibility, including that of looking after their extended families, only 14% of women fall into the category of top earners in South Africa. The South African government, through various initiatives, but currently through the Department of Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities, have championed the development of gender-responsive planning and budgeting. In 2019, our Cabinet approved the Gender-Responsive Planning, Budgeting, Monitoring, Evaluation and Auditing Framework that aims to ensure that our financial resources are allocated to address our gender disparities. Both our government and the private sector have implemented measures to ensure financial inclusion of women. To this end, initiatives such as the Cooperative Banks Act and the South African Social Security Agency MasterCard have been instrumental in integrating millions of South Africans, but especially women, into the financial system. Remarkably, due to these initiatives, the number of bank accounts owned by women now equals those owned by men. Moreover, we have the National Empowerment Fund, providing funding to businesses owned by women, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds, the very women who were once excluded because of the colour of their skin. In addition, the Small Enterprise Finance Agency offers financial assistance to small and medium enterprises with a specific focus on businesses owned by women. This includes loans and other financial products tailored to help South African women. Honourable members, the financial inclusion of women should not be discussed in isolation. We can only expand the influence of women in our economy if we expand the digital economy, digital literacy, and access to data to enable women access to financial opportunities. And it goes without saying that the role of our parliaments in promoting women's financial autonomy is crucial. Our oversight function should monitor the unintended impact of our policies, while we should also hold to account departments, leaders, ministers and sectors who do not play their role in levelling the economic playing field for our women. In South Africa, legislation such as the Unemployment Act and other existing policies are at times implemented inconsistently. The unintended impact, therefore, is that we have yet to adequately address the complex nature of gender-based disparities in South Africa. Your Excellencies, honourable members, South Africa recognises that when we empower a woman, we empower a family, a community and a society as a whole. Our new government, the Government of National Unity, comprising of 10 political parties, understands that empowering women leads ultimately to a more prosperous society. South Africa stands ready to double its efforts in this regard.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to invite Mr. Tariq Adaya, Vice President of the United Arab Emirates, to speak.
Então, houve um engano aqui na ordem da chamada e a palavra, então, será concedida ao senhor Alejandro Ismael Murá Hinojosa, membro da Câmara
I'd like to invite Mr. Alejandro Ismael from the Upper House of Mexico.
Gracias.
Thank you so much, my dear friends. We come to this summit with great satisfaction and joy. First of all, I'd like to share with you that after 200 years, Mexico has its first woman president, and after 85 years of also having the access to vote by behalf of women. And today in Mexico, as our president has said, president we write with A in Spanish, and governor we write with A in the end, and our representative we write with A in the end. So it's all feminine, because as it was said by her, what said we don't know yet, and also the businessmen, the scientific, they should be known as well. And with the majority that's qualified in the Senate and also in the representative chamber, we are making some constitutional reforms of big range, and this has to do with the substantive equality that we have just approved 1 week ago. And I'd like to share with you 6 fundamental points of this big reform, constitutional reform. The first is, it has to do with demanding as a principle an access of life free of violence. And this means that the state should have the obligation of guaranteeing that all the women, girls and boys, teenagers, they should be able to live without any type of violence. And this should imply programs that could prevent the gender violence, as well as the establishment of protection protocols for the victims. Number 2, there is a gender perspective in the procuration and justice security level. And this means that all the security levels in justice procuration, they should have their protocols and practices to embody the perspective of gender, just as to safeguard the integrity of women and girls, ensuring that their rights are protected in such a way that that they are taken into consideration with all the delegates that sometimes they suffer. Number 3, the typification of feminicide. The reform proposes that the feminicide should be considered national level as a crime and should be investigated in each feminicide, each homicide of a woman as a feminicide should not have impunity. The number 4 is the gender parity principle in the public administration, and this means that all the naming of the public administration in federal level, state level, and municipality level, they should observe the parity principle of gender. Number 5, incorporate in the gender perspective the perspective of gender in local constitutions. This means that we should have a reform that all the local constitutions of our country should contemplate the perspective of gender principle, in which they ensure that after the governor we should have a woman governor, and after a man governor and then a woman governor, so we could have this replacement. And of course, this incorporates the state procuration of fiscalization, so that they can embody also the protocols of the gender perspective, and so that they can create this fiscalizing departments in the states they don't have yet. And then at last, the recognition of the salary gap. We recognize that there is a 15% of the salary gap between men and women, and what we are doing right now is to take that in a constitutional level, so that in the Articles 123 that the labor law predicts, we can generate all the protocols and the practices so that we can have a parity in the wages for women and also for men. So as you can see, my colleagues, in a constitutional level have generated the actions to empower politically the women, so that they can be empowered with the President Claudia, so that we can ensure the equality and it can become a habit in our nation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We now invite Mrs. Maria Emília Cerqueira, member of the Parliament of Portugal. Good afternoon once again to everyone. I'll begin by congratulating the panel and those who are with us in this panel. We have discussed equality of representation or equality between women and men, and now also salary equality, because this is what we are discussing. In Europe and Portugal, every year in a date that is not fixed, we have the National Day for Salary Equality. And why is it not a fixed date? It's because it corresponds to a day when 48 days that we work more than men to have the same salary. This continues to be a reality with which we are confronted, and these 48 days essentially, in addition to the salary differences themselves and the work that women do, which is not remunerated, they add to them, despite all the steps that we already gave, in which women are the caregivers and they take care of their children, they must cook and do all the domestic work, which is not remunerated, and this is also must be done between men and women, and the salary equality cannot be reached while we do not find the balance between these roles between men and women. And there must be a collaboration so that these 48 days cease to be a reality with which all of us women are confronted worldwide, even those that are more advanced in this issue of salary equality. And in Portugal, my country, we have decreased salary inequalities. However, on the basis. In the top, we have a relatively low salary inequality, but when you reach the top of the careers, it can get to 25% difference, and it continues to be a smashing difference in this regard. And people ask why? Because our law says equal work, equal pay. But the reality, nonetheless, is that in our countries, women must have to be more qualified than men. And in terms of professional, women are often left behind with the same training. But despite the laws, we are still confronted with some realities that we could not forget, which is the fact that these women, as women, we only have one CEO in Portugal, and it's not enough to say that she's an inheritor of the group, and she was able to get there. It's not because when we're speaking about a choice, I know many have discussed arbitrary choices, and women still need laws that protect them, because when it comes to competence, they don't need it, and we see it when we see the curricula, and when the women do not need the paternalism of anyone because they're competent. But we have another challenge which seems to be important for the world, and we have the obligation to give this future to the new generations, so that our girls and women can choose professions that bring them more money and better social position, because especially those of the mono-parents family with less remunerated, less paid jobs and less recognized jobs. And we have programs to stimulate women and girls to the more technological positions. But the truth is that we still have a long path to tread, because as Portugal, as I said, we'll need over a century to reach the effective reality, to reach the effective equality. And through microcredit, we can get the poor communities to have improvements. And we all have the obligation, as we say in Portuguese, that the path is done by walking with firm steps.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite to speak Mr. Manoj Kumar Jha, member of the upper chamber of the Indian Parliament.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson and distinguished delegates. Love from India, Namaskar from India. I make this important intervention on behalf of my government and of my people, that during the G20 presidency of India, leaders of the G20 agreed to the creation of a working group on the empowerment of women to support the G20 ministerial. I wish to congratulate on behalf of the people of India and the government of India that Brazil has convened already the first meeting of this group. During the 9 G20 Parliamentary Speakers Summit hosted by Parliament of India in 23, there was extensive discussion held on these issues, leading to the kind of engagement we have from what my predecessor, my chairman sir said, from women development to women-led development. We have a very robust framework in the shape of our constitution, which actually guarantees all kinds of freedom and inequality based on cutting across caste, race, gender. Based on that kind of robust framework, I think under the leadership of the Prime Minister, the Government of India has been able to translate the idea of from women development to women-led development. Distinguished delegates, India as always has been fully committed to eliminating all forms of discrimination against women. Our focus, as rightly I shared about women-led development, it has gone into our economic journey, which is economic empowerment and autonomy for women in India, is in fact supported by, apart from constitution, a robust legislative framework. So if you get a chance to look at the kind of schemes we have, Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana, Stand Up India, Startup India, National Skill Development Mission, National Rural Livelihood Mission, and others, it will surprise you. One of my predecessors from South Africa was saying that half the accounts, financial accounts, are of women. In our case, close to 56% of accounts pertaining to financial inclusion are owned by women. That's the kind of success story we are writing. In fact, if you look at the quantum of loans sanctioned under different schemes, particularly Stand Up India, 84% beneficiaries are women because they are the greatest stakeholders. I take pride in stating here that as a result of these kind of legislations, these kind of initiative, this kind of climate, overall enrollment of women at different level of education, particularly in the stream, which earlier was alarming, in the STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, they are doing phenomenally well. Delegates, we also had a historic occasion in our parliament when a bill was passed, Women's Reservation Bill 2023, whereby reserving 1/3 of seats in the national parliament as well as the state assembly is mandated. Now this will usher into an era where you would find them working together, in fact leading all of us. Apart from this, the Parliament of India has also enacted several legislations such as the sexual harassment of women at workplace prevention, prohibition and redressal, 2013. Then Maternity Benefit Act has been revised, which now maternity paid leave is given from 12 weeks, which was earlier, to 26 weeks. All these things, in fact, these initiatives are being taken by the Indian government, by the Indian people, to drive home the point that unless you bring women in the dominant discourse of the nation, all those ideas of development, inclusion shall be meaningless. And before I conclude, I would also say that India's commitment to economic autonomy of women, cutting across interconnected and intersectional issues of gender and racial equality, has been a lamppost for us, has been a guiding principle. I'll just conclude. And in the same trajectory, I, on behalf of my government and on behalf of the people of this country, the great country, the great civilization called India, President Lula, Honorable President Lula, has taken an initiative, and which is very, very important, timely in the current situation, and that is a global alliance against hunger, poverty, or inequality. Underlines our commitment, and we stand in solidarity. Jai.
Muito obrigada.
Thank you very much. We now invite
a senhora Tatiana,
Mrs. Tatiana Sakharova, member of the High Chamber of the Russian Parliament.
Уважаемые коллеги, вклад женщин в мировую экономику является важной составляющей глобального развития, который...
The contribution of women to the global economy is a vital component of global development, affecting poverty reduction, job creation, and the decrease of unemployment. In Russia, the foundation document guiding state policy on women since 2017 is a national strategy for action in the interest of women. This strategy is based on principles of equal rights and freedoms for men and women, creating equal opportunities for women's self-realization across all spheres of life and enhancing their economic independence. The Russian Federation has a Russian female employment. Women make a significant portion of highly skilled scientific professionals and are the majority in sectors such as education, healthcare, social services, hospitality and food services. Women lead approximately 30% of small and medium-sized businesses, totalizing almost 2 million businesses. Female entrepreneurship accounts for up to 90% in the social sector and 58% in the service sector. Women also from the majority of the rapidly growing creative industry sector, making up over 58%. In general, women in the Russian Federation are focused on full employment, care, growth combined with family responsibilities and raising children. A wide range of progress support working mothers in Russia. For example, since 2020, as part of the National Demography Project, retraining skills and enhancement programs have been provided for women on childcare leave with children up to 3 years old, as well as for women with preschool-aged children. Russia places particular emphasis on the development of women's entrepreneurship. For this purpose, various forms of support are available, including financial, property, education, and consulting assistance. In 2023, 35% of Russian companies reported that women made up more than a half of their management team, and the number of such companies is growing every year. Increasing the number of women in leadership positions has been a trend for the past decade. Women are also excellent as heads of small and medium-sized companies and are increasingly successful as successful employment entrepreneurs. The Women's Entrepreneurship Index reached nearly 74% by the end of 2023, making a historic high over the past 10 years. In recent years, we have also observed a growing interest among women in investment. According to the research, and proportion of women among Russian investors has tripled over the past 5 years. A range of regional programs related to mentorship and training stimulates women's entrepreneurial activity. On such a project is a Mom Entrepreneur Program, which targets women with minor children and those on maternity leave who wish to start or develop their own businesses. Participants receive training and financial support in developing business plans. The ongoing work to promote projects and programs in the interest of women is carried out by the Advisory Council of the Federation Council, the Eurasian Women's Forum. Among the projects of the Council in the educational program Woman Leader, over 4 years, 7 educational cohorts have been completed, 2 of which have been international. One of the key projects initiated by Russia in the international competition for women's entrepreneurship projects is APEC Economies. For the 7 years, Russian women have the Eurasian Forum held up the Russian women have constantly ranked among the top participants in the international competition. Last year, our businesswomen once again received the highest awards in the contest. The Eurasian Women's Forum held up all communiques from the W20 contain recommendations on a wide range of issues related to the global women's agenda, which align with the Russian approaches to addressing common challenges. I support in the Eurasian Women's Forum held up auspices of the Federal Councilation is rightly considered the main platform for substantive discussions of women issues. We have talked about this in St. Petersburg during the platform during the we are talking about independence and economic possibilities of women. I'm pretty sure that friendly dialogue related to the our mutual work will be a great contribution to all of us.
Muito obrigada. Convidamos agora
We'd like to invite now
vice-presidente do Parlamento dos Emirados Árabes Unidos.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Excellencies, distinguished attendees and guests, Assalamu alaikum. Good evening. It's a pleasure to address the G20 Parliamentary Forum on a matter that continues to shape societies worldwide. Despite notable progress, the persistence of gender and racial inequalities shows that our work is far from complete. The first P20 meeting of women parliamentarians reaffirmed our collective dedication tackling these challenges. Today, we gather to translate our commitment into a concrete action, making gender equality and women empowerment the women's empowerment central to our legislative work and the future of P20 discussions. Your Excellencies, the impact of gender and racial inequalities spans every corner of society, affecting education, economic participation, and overall opportunities. According to the World Economic Forum, it could take over 130 years to close the global gender gap of current trends persist. The economic implications are profound. Achieving gender equality in the workforce could add up to $28 trillion or 26 to the global GDP by 2025. Women from marginalized racial backgrounds face compound barriers, including lower wages and fewer resources. Addressing these disparities is not only a moral imperative, it is essential for economic growth and social resilience. When women are economically empowered, entire communities benefit. Women reinvest up to 90% of their income into their families, creating a ripple effect that advances health, education, and prosperity. Guided by the outcomes of the P20 meeting, we reaffirm our commitment to dismantling these barriers for a just, sustainable future. As parliamentarians, we are uniquely positioned to drive inclusive and equality through laws and policies that reflect our nation's aspirations. Parliamentary diplomacy is a powerful tool that allows us to amplify best practices and dismantle barriers to equality. Through collaboration within the G20 and other parliamentary bodies like the Inter-Parliamentary Union, IPU, we can advance shared solutions for economic, social, and environmental challenges and empower women worldwide. The UAE has been privileged to contribute on the international stage, notably as chair of the Gender Partnership Group of the Inter-Parliamentary Union, IPU. Since 2019, our parliament has achieved gender parity, with the women now comprising of 50% of its members, demonstrating our commitment to gender balance and women leadership within our parliamentary institutions. The UAE has taken substantial steps to address gender and racial inequalities, promoting women economic autonomy through targeted policies. Our national tolerance policy exemplifies peaceful coexistence and inclusion, reflecting a society where over 200 nationalities live in harmony. The anti-discrimination law of 2015 criminalizes discrimination based on race, gender, religion, and classes, underscoring our dedication to an inclusive environment where all individuals are respected. To further gender equality, the UAE established the Gender Balance Council through Cabinet Resolution number 6 of 2015, which drives initiatives such as equal wage law, enacted in 2020 to ensure equal pay for equal work. The family protection policy provides legal safeguards against gender-based violence, creating safe workplaces and communities. Additionally, the UAE Parental Leave Law introduces 2020 promotes gender equality by providing paid leave for both women and women for support family responsibilities. Through these policies, the UAE demonstrates its commitment to empowering women and celebrating diversity as strength. Our mission is clear: to foster a world where all women and girls, regardless of race or background, can contribute, innovative, and lead. Finally, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to the Brazilian presidency for their unwavering commitment to advancing this important issue. Your leadership has been instrumental in uniting us under this shared goal. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigada.
Very
Passamos
much.
agora
We now
para a
invite
senhora
Mrs. Yandra Moura, member of the House of Representatives of Brazil. Dear ladies and gentlemen, good evening to each and all. I'd like to salute especially Senator Teresa Leitão, president of this third panel working session. It is an honor to be a member of this forum and speak again about the importance of promoting the economic autonomy of women, as I did in the meeting of parliamentary women in Maceió in July. At that meeting, we highlighted the importance of approving legislation that ensure equal pay between men and women, something that Brazil only reached in 2023, but which had been done for a longer time in countries such as Germany, Norway, India, and Mexico. Whether having or not a specific law on this topic, there was a general feeling among the parliamentary members who were there, which is the desire to ensure to women in our nations access to decent work and the possibility of occupying positions of leadership and influence in their communities. One of the recommendations of the Alagoas Charter urges the countries to recognize the central role of economic rights of women and their economic and empowerment and financial independence to attain the 2030 agenda. Among these actions, as we wrote on the Charter, to enable to women equal opportunities of full and productive work, decent work, and equal remuneration for equal value, and adopting measures that recognize, reduce, redistribute, and value the non-remunerated work of caregivers and domestic work undertaken by women and girls. We know that inequalities is a global reality as a direct consequence of the division of non-remunerated work with care. We also know that this economic inequality affects women, which are exclusively responsible for caregiving tasks, and makes it more difficult to tackle violence and domestic violence, since most of these women will have difficulties to break through the cycle of abuses. This situation makes more difficult the economic growth of countries by wasting competences, skills, resources, and talents that could be employed to the development of the societies in which we live. For this reason, I reinforce against the importance of building broad, cross-sectional public policies towards structural changes in the ways in which men and women divide between themselves the huge workload. It is essential that both men and women recognize that caregiving policies are fundamental to tackle economic inequalities that affect particularly the women, but which end up also harming the children and the elders who depend on these care. Fighting hunger and poverty in our nations includes recognizing that women are overloaded with care-giving activities for all members of the society, and which causes problems to their health and the economic autonomy. In Maceió, this topic was emphasized by representatives of many countries. Without tackling this problem, we'll continue watching millions of women in situations of extreme poverty, even in nations where half of the households are led by women. We, Brazilian Parliament members, know about the importance of this issue, and for a long time we have brought this topic as a priority in our work in the House. The construction of a specific legislation on caregiving policies is being discussed in two working groups coordinated by our Secretariat of Women, and here I salute Representative Benedita da Silva, who is our big coordinator of the Secretariat, and the members of many political parties. We've been working for the regulation of more equal licenses for women and men who are parents, for expansion of public services and caregiving, and the raising awareness for the population of the cultural changes that need to be tackled to fight gender inequalities. In addition to these working groups, there is an effort by the Women's Bench at the House of Representatives to approve in the coming months in the plenary of this House and as an urgency some projects aimed at fighting economic inequalities between men and women. One of them is transiting in this House since 2019, including covering the non-remunerated work and the GDP of Brazil. The idea is to stimulate measures that ensure to women who are responsible for household tasks to be seen as individuals that produce and contribute to the well-being of the society. Other proposals implement tax incentives for hiring more women by the companies and create public policies to promote women and girls in leadership spaces through technical cooperation agreements between public and private agents.
Muito obrigada, deputada.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Now we'd like to hand over to Ms. Jussara Lima, member of the Senate of Brazil.
Senhoras e senhores,
ladies, gentlemen, good night.
Presidenta dessa sessão, senadora Tereza Leitão.
President Leitão,
Deputada Soraya e demais
Congresswoman Soraya
representantes aqui da
and
nossa
other
mesa.
representatives of our panel.
Agradeço a feliz
I
oportunidade
thank you for
de
the
me
opportunity
manifestar sobre esse tema
of being able to
tão
speak
atual
on this
e tão
theme
relevante.
that is so current and so
Falar
relevant,
da
to talk about the
feminina
representativity
em
of
espaços
women
decisórios.
in decision spaces,
Decisórios implica em louvar
and this
as
implies
conquistas decorrentes de séculos de luta
in
por
terms of
respeito e
praising
equidade.
the advances after centuries of struggle, and to think about the long path that we had to go through and that we still have to go through. It is about talking about the protagonism of we women. We have to, in the changes, local social changes and global changes. Our Constitution establishes that men and women are equal in the law, and it doesn't allow for discrimination by gender. But the participation of women in the labor market still faces a lot of obstacles, like the lack of opportunities, training, stereotypes, salary gaps, and the worst of all dramas we women face in this history of inequality and disrespect, the violence against women in their various forms. At the cost a lot of struggle and sacrifices and the intense female mobilization, we are bit by bit transforming this reality. More and more, the labor market, the policies, and the spaces in society are changing and opening for women. We women have characteristics that make us different and bring us a peculiar view about human relationships, policies and social policies. We are flexible, resilient. Since very young, we deal with adversity in the various environments, be it in the family, in the field, in the school, in the university, at our jobs, which means we develop an admirable capability of resistance. Our sensitivity and empathy are characteristics of women. We have an incredible capacity of identifying ourselves with other people, of see ourselves in other people's places, and to understand their feelings and their needs. These qualities are not only of of women, but are a registered trademark of our way of being and acting. Women bring to the political arena a different way to deal with problems, because through our experiences, our view of the world are different from the masculine world. The political exercise of women is in the terms of the advances of gender equality, and this different view with empathy makes it fundamental, the strengthening of our participation in the decision-making processes so that we can have social development. We are still distant from gender parity. We are still underrepresented. A lot has been done, but there is still a lot to be done to take out the culture of machismo, misogyny, age-related discrimination, and violence against women. So in the name of all women of my country, of all women in the world, I would like to thank you, to all of you that with love and dedication to this cause, I call that we should unite to make greater efforts. Let's give hands. Let's all together for a better Brazil, for a better world. That this place is not be only a place for men, because women should be where they want to be.
Thank you very much, Senator Jussara. I now pass the floor to Mrs. Silvia Rux, Resident Coordinator of the United Nations in Brazil. Good evening, Your Excellencies. I speak to all authorities, dear ladies and gentlemen. It is a great challenge to be the final speaker of the final session today, right? But as resident coordinator of the UN in Brazil, it is a pleasure to represent the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, in this P20 meeting to speak about the crucial role of parliaments in the fight against inequalities and in the economic empowerment of women. The equalitarian participation of women in politics and in public life is a human right, and it is the basis for democratic societies. Further, the economic empowerment of women, particularly taking into consideration the cross-sectionalities between gender and race, is essential to eradicate poverty and build a prosperous and sustainable society. Having more women in power spaces with their own knowledge and experiences contributes to less conflicts, better life conditions, and more equality. The economic empowerment of women ensures further stability to their families and drives the development in their communities. Further, the participation of women makes the decision-making process more wide-ranging in such way as to favor the harnessing of all available capacities and taking into consideration the general aspirations of the societies. All this data is objective, is proved in dozens of studies and research papers. Still, we have before us a huge challenge to beat the persisting gender, race, and ethnic inequalities. In the political sphere, for instance, only 26 countries have women as their heads of state. 35% of the seats in the local governments are occupied by women, and only 27% of the parliamentary chairs in the world are women. women, are occupied by women. In the economic sphere, beyond the salary gap between men and women, which exists in all countries of the world, women also face obstacles to participate in the decision-making processes. They occupy only 28% of the management positions in the market, and this sub-representation restricts their capacity to contribute to this sector and has direct impacts in the economic autonomy. The committed parliamentary activities is decisive for the progress of the countries and for eliminating gender, race, and ethnic inequalities. It is necessary for us that the laws that are born in the parliaments ensure equal participation in decision-making spaces, both political, private, public, as well as economic and now digital. With adequate representation by women from all social groups. We need the political will to transform effectively the established systems, the public policies in our institutions in such a way that women and girls may have a voice in defining the direction of their communities and of their own lives. Thank you very much.
Muito obrigada, senhora Silvia.
Thank you very much, Ms. Silvia. I'd like to register the importance of all of these interventions done here. The world panorama presented in the various interventions of the countries here represented show us how correct is the choice of this theme for this discussion. Inequalities of gender and race and the difficulties of affirmation of economic autonomy of women exist more or less all over the world. So that's why the struggle has to be collective and global. We'd like to greet and to thank for all the efforts done in all countries, but we'd like to highlight that all here, like all who here work, that this is a strategic issue for democracy and for social justice. I thank you for your help here in the panel, for Congressman Soraya Santos, Benedita Silva, and Andra Moura, the logistical help of Renata. And before I close the session, I would like to invite you all to give us the privilege of your company in a welcome cocktail that will be offered in the Salão Negro next door. As informed in the official program given to the delegations, tomorrow from 10:30 we will have the opening solemnity of the 10th G20 and P20 with the theme Parliaments for a Fair World and a Sustainable Planet. I thank all the authorities present and to all that have honored us with their presence. I'd also like to thank for the delivery of the translation equipment when you leave the Senate. I declare closed the session and the B20, and I wish you all a good night.